I never thought a handwritten note saying, "Grace, basement room," would be the spark that ignited my greatest triumph. My name is Grace Taylor, and 13 months ago, I arrived at my family's annual reunion with a small suitcase and big news. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. After 15 years of being the disappointing family member who chose entrepreneurship over the family law practice, I'd quietly become the new owner of Westlake Country Club, the exclusive sanctuary where the Taylor family had forged connections, closed deals, and displayed their social standing for 3 generations. The same club that had denied me membership after my divorce. Looking back now, I can identify the exact moment when years of family dynamics crystallized into perfect clarity. It was a warm June evening in Oakridge, the kind where fireflies begin their dance at dusk and the scent of magnolias hangs heavy in the air. I'd driven 6 hours to reach Pinehaven Estate, the sprawling property my grandfather had purchased in the 1970s, and which now belonged to my Aunt Diane, the self-appointed matriarch of the Taylor family since my parents' passing. The annual Taylor family reunion was a 3-day affair of carefully orchestrated displays of success. Lawyers, doctors, and financial advisors. The Taylor family had produced them all, with connections that reached into every corner of influence in 3 states. Every corner except the tech industry, which was precisely where I had built my career and, eventually, my fortune. As I pulled my modest sedan, deliberately chosen for this occasion, into the circular driveway already filled with luxury vehicles, I spotted my cousin Thomas directing traffic with the same authoritative gestures he used in the courtroom. Thomas, my aunt's eldest son and managing partner at Taylor & Associates, had always treated family gatherings like military operations, with himself as the commanding officer. "Grace, you're late," he announced as I stepped out of my car, not bothering with a greeting. "Everyone's already settled in. We've had to rearrange the sleeping arrangements." I checked my watch, 4:45 p.m., a full 15 minutes before the suggested arrival time on the meticulously detailed email Thomas had sent 2 weeks earlier. "I'm actually early," I replied, maintaining the pleasant expression I'd practiced during countless investor meetings. The email said arrivals between 5 and 7. Thomas consulted his phone with a frown. Plans changed. Aunt Meredith and Uncle Frank brought their new grandbaby, so they needed the blue room with the adjoining nursery. "We've put you in the basement. It's been fixed up since last year." By fixed up, I would soon discover he meant that a dehumidifier had been added to combat the persistent damp, and a partition had been installed to separate the sleeping area from the storage boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns. In previous years, I might have protested or felt the sting of being relegated to the lowest tier of the family hierarchy. This year, I simply nodded and reached for my suitcase. "I'll take that," Thomas said, not as an offer of assistance but as a directive. "Diane wants to see everyone on the back terrace for cocktails at 6. Business casual." As Thomas strode away with my luggage, I remained by my car for a moment, using the brief solitude to center myself. The reunion had barely begun, and already the familiar patterns were emerging, the subtle reminders of my place in the family order, the assumption that my time and comfort were less valuable than others, the carefully coded language that reinforced hierarchy. For 14 years since graduating with my computer science degree instead of following the expected path to law school, I had accepted this treatment. For 8 years since divorcing Marcus, a divorce the family blamed entirely on my workaholic tendencies and unrealistic ambitions, I had tolerated being treated as the cautionary tale, the example of potential squandered. But this year was different. 3 months earlier, through a complex series of investment maneuvers and a holding company that couldn't be traced back to me, I had acquired controlling interest in Westlake Country Club, the exclusive sanctuary where Taylor family weddings were held, where business deals were sealed over golf, where social standing was displayed and reinforced. The same club that had, following my divorce from Marcus, whose family had been members for generations, conveniently lost my application for individual membership. The rejection had been delivered with polite regret by the membership committee, on which my former father-in-law and my own uncle both sat. I followed the stone path around to the back of the house, where voices and the occasional burst of laughter indicated that the gathering was already underway. The back terrace of Pinehaven was an architectural showcase, travertine marble extending from the house to create an outdoor living space with a sweeping view of the manicured grounds sloping down to a small lake. Wrought iron furniture with plush cushions was arranged in conversational groupings, and servers in crisp white shirts circulated with trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres. Aunt Diane held court near the stone balustrade, elegant in a blue sheath, dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 62, she maintained the same sleek blonde bob she'd worn for decades, her face a testament to the skilled application of both cosmetics and subtle cosmetic procedures. She was speaking with my former sister-in-law, Jessica, who had somehow retained her place in family gatherings despite my excision from her brother's life. I moved toward the bar, hoping to secure a drink before the inevitable interrogation began. My brother Andrew intercepted me halfway. "Gracie," he said, his voice carrying the familiar mix of genuine affection and perpetual concern. "You made it. How's the startup thing going?" Andrew was the closest thing to an ally I had in the family, the corporate attorney who had followed the prescribed path, but occasionally demonstrated flashes of independence. Still, startup thing was a significant demotion from the actual name of my company, Meridian Tech Solutions, which had been featured in Forbes the previous month. "The startup thing is going quite well," I said, accepting the champagne flute a server offered as they passed. "How's corporate law treating you?" "Same as always. Steady. Dad would be proud." Andrew's default response to any question about his career, accompanied by the standard reference to our late father. "Listen, Thomas mentioned you're in the basement. I tried to argue for giving you the green room, but Diane's adamant about keeping that open for Pastor Mitchell if he decides to stay overnight after Sunday service." The familiar justification, someone else's hypothetical needs trumping my actual ones. I'd heard variations of this reasoning my entire adult life. "The basement is fine, Andrew. I'm only here for 2 nights. "That's the spirit," he said, patting my shoulder in a way that made me feel 16 again. "Oh, have you heard? Marcus is being considered for regional managing partner at Blackwell and Price. He's here, by the way, with Vanessa." Marcus and his second wife were expected, of course. My ex-husband had remained firmly embedded in Taylor family events, his legal connections too valuable to exclude, his new wife, 14 years his junior, too socially connected to ignore. The mention of Marcus's potential promotion was deliberate, a reminder of what I had supposedly sacrificed by choosing my own path over supporting his. By Taylor family mythology, I had failed my marriage by pursuing my business ambitions instead of focusing on being the supportive spouse of a rising legal star. What the family narrative conveniently overlooked was Marcus's systematic undermining of my career goals, his helpful suggestions that I scale back my company's growth to focus on starting a family, his gradual rewriting of our shared dreams, until they centered entirely around his trajectory. When I had finally confronted the reality that our marriage had become another venue for the same dynamics I'd experienced in my family, my ambitions treated as secondary, my success viewed as a distraction from proper priorities, the divorce had been swift and brutal. "I'm sure Marcus and Blackwell and Price deserve each other," I said, taking a deliberate sip of champagne. Andrew winced slightly. "Try to keep things civil this weekend, okay? Diane's invited the Harringtons for dinner tomorrow. Robert's on the board of the country club now, and Uncle George is hoping to discuss the charity gala." The casual mention of the country club sent a small thrill through me, the first hint of the revelation to come. Robert Harrington, newly appointed to the board of directors at Westlake, was unaware that the ownership change had already been finalized. The announcement had been deliberately delayed until after this weekend, at my request. "I'm always civil, Andrew," I replied. "It's one of my many underappreciated qualities." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before Andrew could respond, Aunt Diane's voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Grace, there you are. We were beginning to think you'd forgotten about us again." The "again" referred to the previous year's reunion, which I had missed due to a critical funding round for Meridian. The successful completion of that round had, ironically, provided the capital that eventually enabled my acquisition of the country club. I turned toward my aunt, composing my features into the pleasant mask I had perfected for difficult board meetings. "Diane, wonderful to see you. The estate looks beautiful as always." She accepted this with a regal nod, as though the compliment was merely her due. "Thomas mentioned he showed you to your room. I hope you understand the necessity of the arrangement, with so many accomplished family members requiring appropriate accommodations." The implication hung in the air between us, that my place in the basement reflected my place in the family hierarchy, determined by a calculus of achievement that recognized only certain types of success. "The basement will be fine," I said, maintaining my smile. "I've always been able to adapt to challenging environments. It's a valuable skill in business." Diane's eyes narrowed slightly at what she correctly interpreted as a subtle pushback. "Yes, well, your little tech venture has certainly shown surprising resilience. Though I understand the market is quite volatile these days." My little tech venture had recently been valued at $440 million, information that was public for anyone who bothered to read business news, but which the Taylor family collectively and conveniently overlooked. "Markets are always evolving," I agreed pleasantly. "That's what makes anticipating changes and positioning oneself advantageously so important, don't you think?" Before Diane could formulate a response to this deliberate double meaning, a commotion at the terrace entrance drew our attention. Marcus had arrived with Vanessa, his entrance timed for maximum impact now that most guests were present. At 42, Marcus still possessed the confident bearing and practiced charm that had once attracted me, silver threading his dark hair in a way that enhanced rather than diminished his appearance, his bespoke suit signaling success without ostentation. Vanessa, a former client from his corporate law days, complimented him perfectly. Poised, decorative, and unfailingly supportive. Everything I had failed to be in the family's estimation. The next hour unfolded with the predictable rhythms of Taylor family gatherings, conversations centered on law firm politics, recent court victories, vacation properties acquired, and the educational achievements of various children and grandchildren. My contributions were met with polite but brief acknowledgments before the discussion returned to topics deemed more central to family interests. When Thomas announced dinner would be served in the formal dining room, I found myself seated at the far end of the table, between a second cousin's teenage son who was glued to his phone and an empty chair later filled by my elderly Uncle Warren, whose hearing loss made conversation virtually impossible. The placement was not accidental. Another subtle reminder of my peripheral status. As servers presented the first course, Thomas rose to offer a welcome speech that doubled as a family status report. Promotions were announced, academic honors recognized, notable real estate purchases highlighted. When he reached the section on family business successes, he breezed past my company with a generic, "and Grace continues with her technology work," before lavishing detail on a cousin's new partnership in a regional law practice. I maintained my composed expression, a skill honed through years of being underestimated in investor meetings. My phone vibrated in my clutch, a text from Patricia Alvarez, my mentor, and the one person who knew the full extent of my recent acquisition. "Is the stage set?" her message read. I suppressed a smile as I typed back, "Almost." The basement accommodations were a particularly nice touch. Patricia had been instrumental in my journey from ambitious programmer to successful CEO. As one of the few women who had broken through the tech industry's glass ceiling in the previous generation, she had recognized my potential when others had dismissed it. When I had shared my plan to acquire Westlake Country Club, not as a vanity purchase but as both a sound investment and a long-overdue correction of a personal injustice, Patricia had not only supported the strategy but helped refine it. The coup? Longer they underestimate you, she had told me, the more satisfying the revelation will be. As dinner progressed, the conversation turned to tomorrow night's event, a more formal gathering where several influential families, including the Harringtons, would join the reunion festivities. Robert Harrington mentioned some exciting changes coming to Westlake, my Uncle George announced, clearly relishing his insider knowledge. Apparently, there's been a change in ownership. I took a careful sip of water, watching the ripples of interest move around the table. Who would sell Westlake? Thomas asked, frowning. The membership has kept it privately held for decades specifically to maintain standards. My Aunt Diane nodded approvingly at her son. Exactly. The exclusivity is what makes it valuable. I can't imagine the membership would approve a sale without significant guarantees about maintaining traditions. Robert was quite mysterious about it, Uncle George continued. Just said that the new ownership had impressive plans for modernizing while respecting the club's heritage. Apparently, the full announcement comes next week. Marcus, seated near the head of the table in the position once occupied by my father, leaned forward with the authoritative air he used to command attention in courtrooms. I had lunch with James Peterson from the membership committee last week, he said. There's speculation it might be a private equity group with experience in luxury properties. The sale was apparently handled very discreetly through a holding company. I bit back a smile at how close yet far from the truth Marcus was. The holding company, Artemis Partners, had indeed been created specifically for this transaction, named for the goddess of the hunt, a private joke between Patricia and me about patiently tracking a target. The conversation continued around me, speculation building about what the ownership change might mean for membership protocols, dues structure, and the exclusivity that the Taylor family and their social circle prized so highly. No one thought to include me in this discussion, my banishment to the basement room reflecting my perceived irrelevance to matters of social consequence. After dinner, as the gathering dispersed into smaller groups for coffee and digestives, I excused myself, citing work emails that required attention. No one questioned this. My workaholic tendencies were a well-established part of the family's narrative about me, further evidence of my misaligned priorities. The basement room was exactly as I had anticipated, functional but clearly inferior to the guest rooms upstairs. A queen bed with plain bedding occupied one half of the space, while metal shelving units lined the other half, laden with holiday decorations and old family records. The promised dehumidifier hummed in the corner, fighting a battle against the persistent dampness. On the bedside table lay a handwritten note in my aunt's elegant script. Grace, we've placed fresh towels in the small bathroom in the hall. Please remember to turn off the dehumidifier when you leave the room. Diane. No welcome. No expression of pleasure at my presence. Just instructions to properly maintain my assigned space. I changed from my dinner attire into more comfortable clothes and settled at the small desk wedged between the bed and a shelving unit. Opening my laptop, I reviewed the final details for Monday's announcement about Westlake Country Club's new ownership and the planned improvements. Improvements that would include not only physical renovations, but also a complete overhaul of the membership policies that had been used to exclude those who didn't fit the club's narrow definition of appropriate. A text from Patricia interrupted my work. How's the basement? Charming, I replied, complete with family archives. I'm apparently unworthy to be stored with. Their loss, came her quick response. Monday will be sweet. Indeed it would. The Taylor family's social standing was inextricably linked to their Westlake membership, a connection soon to be under my control, though they didn't yet realize it. The club had been more than a leisure facility for them. It had been a symbol of their arrival, their acceptance into circles of influence that extended beyond the legal community. My father had often said that more cases were won on Westlake's golf course than in any courtroom. The irony that I, the family disappointment, would soon control this essential piece of their social infrastructure was not lost on me. The cousin, who had chosen computers over case law, independence over tradition, would hold the keys to a kingdom they valued above almost all else. As I prepared for bed, I could hear faint laughter from upstairs, where the important family members were, likely still gathered in the main living room, sharing stories and reinforcing connections. In previous years, this exclusion had stung. Tonight, it felt like the calm before a storm of my own making. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the golf tournament that traditionally occupied the second day of the reunion. I dressed in athletic wear and joined the family for breakfast on the terrace, where Thomas was already distributing groupings and tea times for those participating. "Grace," he said with mild surprise when I approached the table where he was organizing scorecards. "I didn't put you down for golf. You haven't played in years." This was true. After my divorce, when Westlake had rejected my membership application, I had abandoned the sport rather than searching for another club where I would inevitably encounter Marcus and his social circle. "I thought I might join you today," I said lightly. "It's been too long." Thomas frowned at his meticulous list. "We've already established the foursomes based on handicaps. It would disrupt the tournament structure to add another player now." "I could just walk along with one of the groups," I suggested, knowing the response this would elicit. "That would distract the players," he replied predictably. "Why don't you enjoy the house? I believe some of the non-golfers are planning a shopping excursion to town later." The dismissal was delivered with the same casual certainty Thomas applied to all family matters. His authority assumed rather than earned. His decisions presented as final. "Actually," I said, maintaining a pleasant tone, "I have some work to finish this morning. I'll catch up with everyone this afternoon." Relief flickered across Thomas's face. "Good plan. We should all be back by 4 to prepare for tonight's dinner with the Harringtons." I returned to the basement room, using the morning hours to finalize details for Monday's announcement with my executive team. We had developed a comprehensive plan for Westlake, maintaining its excellence while eliminating the arbitrary and often discriminatory practices that had allowed the membership committee to preserve a very specific demographic profile without explicitly stating such intentions. By early afternoon, I emerged from my work cocoon and changed into a simple sundress, making my way to the kitchen where several non-golfing family members were preparing snacks for the returning tournament participants. My Aunt Diane was supervising the arrangement of charcuterie boards with the same precision she applied to all household matters. She glanced up as I entered. "Grace, there you are. I thought perhaps you'd left without saying goodbye." The suggestion that I might leave early was not innocent. It referenced my supposedly unreliable nature, my prioritization of work over family. "And miss tonight's dinner? I wouldn't dream of it," I replied, selecting a grape from one of the platters. Diane swatted my hand away from the carefully arranged food. "Those are for the golfers. They'll be hungry after their exertions." The rebuke was small but telling. Even in this minor matter, I was being reminded of my place outside the circle of those who mattered. "Of course," I said, withdrawing my hand. "Any word on when they'll return?" Thomas texted that they're finishing the back nine now. They should be here within the hour. Diane turned her attention back to directing the placement of cheese wedges. "I've laid out your dress for tonight on your bed. The navy sheath from last year. It's suitable for the occasion and won't clash with the family photos." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You went through my suitcase?" Diane waved a dismissive hand. I simply wanted to ensure you had appropriate attire. The Harringtons are important connections for the family, and Robert is quite influential at Westlake. We need to present a unified impression. The invasion of privacy was breathtaking, yet entirely consistent with how the Taylor family operated. Boundaries existed only for those deemed worthy of such consideration. I've brought my own selection for tonight, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building inside me. But thank you for your concern. Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. I hope it's suitable. This isn't one of your tech industry cocktail hours where casual attire is acceptable. Before I could respond, the first wave of golfers returned, their voices carrying from the front of the house. The moment of confrontation passed as Diane hurried to greet them, instructing servers to begin circulating with refreshments. I retreated to the basement room, finding, as promised, my navy dress from the previous year laid out on the bed, a conservative, unmemorable garment that would allow me to blend into the background of family photographs without drawing attention. Beside it lay a pair of modest pumps and a simple pearl necklace I recognized as one Diane had given me for my 30th birthday, appropriate for a professional woman who understood her place. Instead, I opened my suitcase and removed what I had actually planned to wear, a deep emerald sheath dress that Patricia had helped me select specifically for this evening. Its subtle elegance and perfect tailoring conveyed something the navy dress never could: confidence and success on my own terms. As I prepared for the evening, I received another text from Patricia. Everything set for Monday? All confirmed, I replied. Press release approved, legal reviewed the announcement. Board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Perfect timing after their weekend, she responded, adding a winking emoji. The formal dinner with the Harringtons and other local notables began at 7, with cocktails in the grand living room of Pinehaven Estate. I timed my entrance deliberately, arriving after most guests were already present but before dinner was announced. The emerald dress had the intended effect. Several heads turned as I entered, including Marcus, whose momentary expression of appreciation quickly shifted to a neutral mask when he realized who he was admiring. His wife, Vanessa, perpetually vigilant about his attention, placed a proprietary hand on his arm. Robert Harrington, silver-haired and distinguished in his 60s, was engaged in conversation with Thomas and Uncle George near the fireplace. As a newly appointed board member at Westlake, Robert represented exactly the type of connection the Taylor family cultivated assiduously: wealthy, influential, and embedded in the social infrastructure that sustained their professional networks. I circulated through the room, exchanging pleasantries with family members and their guests. The conversations were predictable: compliments on Diane's hosting, discussions of the day's golf tournament, updates on children's achievements and vacation properties acquired. Through it all, I maintained an interested expression while watching. The central group near the fireplace, where the discussion had turned to Westlake Country Club. The membership committee is quite selective, Robert was saying to an attentive Thomas. We've maintained standards through careful consideration of each application. It's what preserves Westlake's unique character. Absolutely essential, Thomas agreed. That's why we've been members for 3 generations. The right people make all the difference. The right people had never included divorced women who prioritized their careers over supporting their husbands, regardless of their professional achievements or financial qualifications. The rejection of my membership application after my divorce had been delivered with polite regret that barely masked the actual message. Without Marcus, I no longer fit the club's profile of desirability. Dinner was announced, and we moved to the formal dining room where place cards directed each guest to their assigned seat. Mine, predictably, was at the far end of the table, between a distant cousin's husband and one of the local bank managers. Cordial company, but far from the center of influence where Thomas, Diane, and the Harringtons were clustered. The 5-course meal progressed with the practiced elegance that characterized all of Diane's entertaining. Between the main course and dessert, Uncle George rose to offer a toast, thanking the guests for joining the Taylor family reunion festivities and highlighting the remarkable achievements of our family members in law, medicine, and finance. My technology company, despite its recent valuation and industry recognition, went unmentioned. A deliberate omission that once would have hurt, but now struck me as merely predictable. As servers presented dessert, Robert Harrington steered the conversation back to Westlake Country Club. "I'm not at liberty to share all the details," he said with the satisfaction of a man with privileged information. "But I can tell you that the ownership change will be announced Monday morning. There are significant enhancements planned. A complete renovation of the East Wing, upgrades to the golf course, and expanded dining facilities." "Any word on membership policies?" Marcus asked, leaning forward with interest. "There's been talk of expanding the numbers." Robert nodded sagely. "Some modernization of the application process, certainly. The new ownership recognizes the importance of evolution while maintaining traditions. I've been assured that existing members will find their experience enhanced rather than diluted." "That's the essential balance," Diane agreed. "Progress without sacrificing standards." The standards that had been used to exclude me and others who didn't fit the club's narrow definition of acceptable remained unspoken, but understood by everyone at the table. After dinner, the gathering moved to the conservatory for brandy and coffee. I had positioned myself near the periphery of the room when Robert Harrington approached, drink in hand. "Miss Taylor?" he said, offering a polite smile. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Robert Harrington." "Grace Taylor," I replied, shaking his offered hand. "Lovely to meet you, Mr. Harrington." "Your family speaks highly of their long association with Westlake," he said. "I understand you're in the technology sector?" The question was posed with the vague interest of someone making polite conversation rather than seeking actual information. "Yes, I founded Meridian Tech Solutions," I said, watching his expression for any sign of recognition. "Interesting," he replied with the bland approval of someone who had no idea what my company did, but felt obligated to respond positively. Small business ownership can be so rewarding. The dismissal of a $440 million company as a small business was so perfectly aligned with the Taylor family narrative that I almost laughed. "It has its challenges and satisfactions," I agreed mildly. "Rather like serving on the board at Westlake, I imagine. Balancing tradition with necessary change must require considerable finesse." Robert straightened slightly, pleased to be redirected to a topic where he felt authoritative. "Indeed it does. The membership expects us to preserve what makes Westlake special while ensuring it remains competitive with newer clubs. The upcoming changes should accomplish both objectives." "I look forward to hearing the announcement on Monday," I said. "You follow club news?" he asked, surprised. "More closely than you might expect," I replied, with a smile that contained years of patience, finally reaching its reward. Before Robert could inquire further, Thomas approached to steer him toward Uncle George, who was apparently eager to discuss the club's charity gala scheduled for the following month. I was once again sidelined, my conversation deemed less important than the connections Thomas wished to cultivate. As the evening wound down, I slipped away to the basement room, exchanging my elegant dress for comfortable loungewear. Seated on the edge of the bed, I sent a final confirmation email to my executive team about Monday's announcement, copying Patricia on the details. Her response came quickly. "Perfect. Rest well, CEO. Monday will be illuminating for the Taylor clan." Sunday morning brought the final tradition of the Taylor family reunion. Breakfast followed by a group attendance at the local church where generations of Taylors had been baptized, married, and memorialized. I joined the family for breakfast, noting that the seating arrangement once again placed me at the periphery of the main table. Diane was discussing the previous evening with satisfied propriety. Robert was quite impressed with the family, she announced. He mentioned to me that he appreciates how we've maintained professional excellence across generations. That kind of recognition is invaluable for our standing at Westlake. The irony that the family's standing at Westlake would soon be directly influenced by the member they had relegated to the basement was becoming increasingly difficult to contain. I focused on my coffee, maintaining a neutral expression as discussions swirled around church attire and departure times. "Grace," Thomas called from his position at the head of the table. "We'll be leaving for church in 45 minutes. Pastor Mitchell is expecting the family to be seated by 10:30. The instruction was delivered with the same authoritative tone he had used since childhood. Thomas had been preparing for his role as family patriarch since he was old enough to form sentences. "I'll be ready," I assured him, rising to return to the basement room and change for church. As I dressed in a simple but elegant suit, chosen specifically for its appropriateness for both church and Monday's press conference, I reflected on the weekend's accumulation of small indignities. The basement room assignment, the dismissal from golf participation, the intrusion into my personal belongings, the strategic placement at meals to minimize my inclusion in significant conversations. Each incident individually could be explained away, but collectively they formed an unmistakable pattern of deliberate marginalization. The church service proceeded with predictable formality, the Taylor family occupying the same front pews they had claimed for decades. Pastor Mitchell acknowledged their presence specifically in his welcome. Wonderful to see the Taylor family, gathered once again for their annual reunion, reinforcing their status as notable parishioners. Following the service, as the family gathered on the church steps for the traditional reunion photograph, I was positioned at the edge of the group, easily cropped out if desired, a physical manifestation of my peripheral status. The remainder of Sunday unfolded with the familiar rhythms of reunion conclusion: a casual lunch, packing of suitcases, exchange of perfunctory goodbyes. No one questioned my early departure, scheduled for mid-afternoon rather than the Monday morning exodus. Most family members planned. My work commitments were accepted without interest, further evidence of my misaligned priorities in the family's estimation. As I retrieved my suitcase from the basement room, I performed a final check to ensure I had left nothing behind. The space had served its purpose, both as temporary accommodation and as the perfect symbolic representation of my family's perception of my place in the hierarchy. Diane found me as I was loading my car, her expression set in the polite mask. She reserved for necessary but unenjoyable social obligations. "Leaving already?" she asked, though she knew my departure time had been included in Thomas's master schedule. "Yes, I have an early meeting tomorrow," I replied, closing the trunk. "Well, it was good of you to make time for family this year," she said, the backhanded compliment perfectly calibrated to emphasize my supposed unreliability. I hope the basement room wasn't too uncomfortable. With so many important family members requiring appropriate accommodations. The repetition of her justification from Friday evening brought our interaction full circle, the final reminder of my status before I departed. The basement was enlightening, I said truthfully. It provided the perfect perspective for what comes next. Diane's perfectly maintained eyebrows rose slightly at this cryptic response, but she didn't inquire further. "Safe travels, then. Perhaps next year. You'll be able to stay for the full reunion." "Next year will certainly be different," I agreed, offering a smile that contained more than she could possibly understand. As I drove away from Pinehaven Estate, I placed a call through my car's Bluetooth system. "Patricia Alvarez," came the crisp response. "I'm on my way back," I said. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" "Absolutely," Patricia confirmed. Press release scheduled for 9 a.m., immediately following the board meeting. The Westlake staff has been informed to expect new ownership instructions. Legal has the membership policy revisions prepared for immediate implementation. "And the special notification?" I asked. "Prepared exactly as you specified," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The Taylor family will receive the news in the most appropriate manner. Monday morning arrived with the clarity that often follows significant decisions. I woke in my downtown Oakridge apartment, a sleek, minimalist space that reflected my actual taste rather than the conventional aesthetics the Taylor family deemed appropriate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, steel and glass monuments to progress and possibility stretching toward a cloudless, blue sky. This apartment, like much of my actual life, remained unknown to my family. They still pictured me in the modest condo I'd maintained after my divorce, another piece of evidence in their narrative about my struggling career path. The careful compartmentalization had been deliberate. I had learned years ago that the Taylor family used information as currency, knowledge as a means of control. My success had flourished in part because I had removed it from their scrutiny and potential interference. As I prepared for the day, selecting a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that projected both authority and understated confidence, I thought about how differently the Taylor family would have treated me this weekend had they known the full extent of my accomplishments. The basement room assignment, the dismissive comments about my little tech venture, the strategic exclusion from significant conversations, all would have been replaced with the calculated attention they reserved for those they deemed useful to their collective advancement. The realization brought not bitterness, but clarity. The treatment I had endured wasn't personal. It was systematic, a family culture that assigned value based on a narrow definition of success and contribution. My relegation to the basement wasn't about me as an individual, but about maintaining a hierarchy that preserved certain members' sense of superiority and control. At precisely 8:30 a.m., I arrived at the downtown offices of Artemis Partners, the holding company I had established for the Westlake Country Club acquisition. Patricia was already there, elegant in a crimson suit that complemented her silver hair, reviewing documents with our legal team. "Ready for the grand unveiling?" she asked, looking up with a smile that held years of shared understanding. "More than ready," I confirmed, accepting the folder she handed me containing the final press release and board meeting agenda. The Westlakes. Country Club board meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., with the formal announcement of new ownership to follow immediately after. Robert Harrington and the other board members were expecting to meet the representative of the mysterious holding company that had acquired controlling interest in their beloved institution. None of them anticipated that representative would be me. "The car is waiting," Patricia noted, glancing at her watch. "And I've confirmed the special delivery to Pinehaven Estate is scheduled for 9:15, shortly after the announcement goes public." The special delivery was perhaps an unnecessary flourish, but after years of calculated slights, I had allowed myself this one moment of orchestrated revelation. A courier would deliver personalized letters to each Taylor family member still gathered at Pinehaven, informing them of Westlake's new ownership structure before the news reached the general public. As our car approached Westlake Country Club, I took a moment to appreciate the irony of the situation. The last time I had attempted to enter these grounds, when I'd submitted my individual membership application after my divorce, I had been politely but firmly rejected. Today, I would walk through those same doors as the controlling owner. The club itself was an architectural testament to old money and exclusivity, a grand colonial revival structure set amid meticulously maintained grounds, its white columns and imposing facade designed to evoke tradition and permanence, the very image of institutional stability that the Taylor family and their social circle valued above almost all else. In the boardroom, 8 men and 1 woman, the token female board member whose presence allowed them to claim diversity, were gathered around a gleaming mahogany table. Their expressions as I entered behind Patricia ranged from confusion to surprise to dawning comprehension. Robert Harrington recovered first, rising from his seat with practiced social grace that barely masked his bewilderment. "Ms. Taylor, I wasn't aware you were involved with Artemis Partners." "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," I replied, taking the seat at the head of the table that had been reserved for the new ownership representative. I appreciate your prompt attendance at this transition meeting. Patricia distributed folders containing the formal ownership announcement and planned changes to club operations. As you'll see, she explained with professional detachment, Ms. Taylor is not merely involved with Artemis Partners. She is Artemis Partners, the sole owner and managing director. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees as this information was processed. Robert Harrington's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, disbelief, and finally a carefully constructed professional neutrality. This is unexpected, he said finally, opening the folder. Before him, we were given to understand that Artemis was a private equity group specializing in luxury properties. A reasonable assumption based on the information provided, I acknowledged. Artemis was established specifically for this acquisition, named for the goddess of the hunt, patient, strategic, and precise. The board members exchanged glances, recalibrating their understanding of the situation and, by extension, their relationship to me. Gone was the dismissive politeness of yesterday's brief interaction at Pinehaven, replaced by the wary attention reserved for those with unexpected power. Over the next 45 minutes, I outlined my vision for Westlake, a comprehensive plan that would maintain the club's excellence while eliminating the arbitrary and exclusionary practices that had defined its membership policies. The East wing renovation would proceed as planned, along with golf course improvements and expanded dining facilities. But these physical enhancements would be accompanied by substantive changes to the club's governance and accessibility. Membership will be based on clear, objective criteria, I explained, indicating the relevant section in their packets. Professional accomplishment, community contribution, and commitment to the club's future, not family connections, social affiliations, or marital status. This last point was delivered with deliberate emphasis, its personal significance evident to anyone familiar with my history at Westlake. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps recalling their roles in rejecting my membership application years earlier. Ms. Taylor, one of the older board members interjected, his tone suggesting he was accustomed to being heated. Westlake's exclusivity is central to its identity and value. Members expect a certain consistency in the club's composition. The carefully worded objection contained volumes of meaning. The unstated but fundamental purpose of Westlake's membership policies had always been to maintain consistency in its demographic profile without explicitly stating such intentions. I understand the concern, I replied evenly. But exclusivity based on merit rather than background will enhance Westlake's reputation and relevance in today's business environment. The changes will be implemented thoughtfully, with respect for the club's history while addressing its future needs. The discussion continued, with board members gradually shifting from resistance to negotiation as they recognized the inevitability of the changes I proposed. By meeting's end, a tentative acceptance had emerged. Not enthusiastic embrace, but professional acknowledgement of new realities. The press release will be distributed at 10 a.m., Patricia informed them as the meeting concluded. A staff announcement is scheduled for 10:30, followed by an email to the full membership this afternoon. As the board members gathered their materials, Robert Harrington approached me with the careful diplomacy of someone reassessing a significant miscalculation. I must say, Miss Taylor, you've managed quite a surprising acquisition. I believe we spoke just yesterday at your family's gathering and you gave no indication that I was more than the peripheral family member assigned to the basement room. I finished for him, allowing a small smile. Yes, that was by design. His expression confirmed that he recalled our brief exchange and his dismissive assumption that I was merely another female relative with a hobby business. The recalibration happening behind his eyes, from condescension to cautious respect, was precisely the shift I had anticipated when planning this revelation. I look forward to working with the board during this transition, I added professionally. Your experience with Westlake's operations will be valuable as we implement improvements. The olive branch was strategic. I would need the cooperation of at least some existing board members to ensure a smooth transition, and Robert Harrington's influence within that group made him a pragmatic first ally. Of course, he replied, recovering his composure. Your family has a long history with Westlake. I'm sure that tradition informed your interest in acquiring the club. The assumption that my connection to Westlake was primarily through the Taylor family, rather than my own independent vision, was telling. Even now, faced with clear evidence of my autonomy and success, the default was to frame my achievement in relation to family legacy. The Taylor connection is certainly part of the history, I acknowledged neutrally, but Artemis Partners' interest is firmly focused on Westlake's future. As we exited the boardroom, my phone vibrated with a text from Patricia, who had stepped out moments earlier. Courier delivered the letters to Pinehaven. Thomas already called the office demanding verification. The news brought a small but distinct satisfaction. Back at Pinehaven Estate, the Taylor family reunion was concluding, with their traditional Monday brunch before departures. The arrival of personalized letters on Westlake Country Club letterhead, delivered by courier to each family member, would have created precisely the disruption I had envisioned. Confusion followed by disbelief, culminating in the realization that the family member they had deemed least significant now controlled an institution central to their social standing. "Shall I take the call when he tries again?" Patricia asked as we walked toward the main clubhouse entrance. No, I decided. Let's complete the staff announcement first. Family matters can wait until club business is properly addressed. The staff gathering in Westlake's main ballroom represented the operational heart of the club. Department heads, service staff, groundskeepers, kitchen personnel, and administrative team members, many of whom had worked at Westlake for decades. Their reception would be a critical indicator of how the broader membership might respond to the ownership change. As I stood before them, I was acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. Many of these employees had witnessed my rejection from the club following my divorce, had perhaps overheard comments about the Taylor girl who thought she could maintain membership without her husband. Their expressions now held a mix of curiosity, apprehension, and in some cases, barely concealed amusement at the reversal of fortune. "Good morning," I began, deliberately eschewing the formal distance that previous ownership had maintained with staff. "As you've likely heard, Westlake Country Club has undergone a change in ownership. Artemis Partners, which I represent, has acquired controlling interest with the intention of preserving what makes this club exceptional while implementing necessary improvements. Over the next 20 minutes, I outlined changes that would directly impact the staff: enhanced benefits, adjusted wage structures, improved working conditions, and greater involvement in operational decisions. These weren't merely cosmetic adjustments, but substantial reforms designed to address long-standing inequities in how the club treated its employees. Westlake's excellence has always depended on your expertise and dedication, I concluded. Under new ownership, that contribution will be properly recognized and rewarded. The response was cautiously positive, not effusive celebration, but genuine appreciation from people who had expected new ownership to prioritize member experience at their expense. As the meeting dispersed, several longtime employees approached to express support, including Maria Fernandez, the head of housekeeping who had worked at Westlake for over 20 years. "Ms. Taylor," she said quietly, her voice carrying the slight accent of her native Columbia. "I remember when they turned down your application. Mr. Reynolds's father made sure of it, said a divorced woman running a business wasn't the right image for Westlake. Some of us were very angry about that. The confirmation of what I had long suspected, that my ex-father-in-law had deliberately influenced the membership committee's decision, wasn't surprising, but the solidarity from staff members who had witnessed the injustice was unexpectedly moving. Things change, Maria, I replied with a smile. Sometimes for the better. As we completed the staff announcement, my phone registered multiple missed calls. 3 from Thomas, 2 from Uncle George, and 1 from Marcus, all within the past 30 minutes. The Taylor family grapevine was evidently operating at full capacity. Before I could decide whether to return any of these calls, Patricia approached with an update on pressing operational matters that required immediate attention. The club's summer gala, an annual event that significantly influenced Westlake's community standing and fundraising capacity, was scheduled for the following month, and decisions about its direction could not be delayed. The previous committee had a very traditional vision, Patricia explained diplomatically as we reviewed their proposal. Perhaps we should consider alternatives more aligned with our new direction. The planning document revealed exactly the event one would expect from Westlake's previous leadership, an exclusionary affair with astronomical ticket prices, limited accessibility, and beneficiaries selected more for their social prominence than demonstrated need. Let's reconstitute the committee, I decided. Maintain some continuity with existing members, but add perspectives that have been historically underrepresented. The gala should showcase Westlake's new inclusive excellence, not perpetuate outdated exclusivity. As we worked through these immediate priorities, my phone continued to accumulate notifications, text messages, voicemails, and email alerts, predominantly from Taylor family members in escalating states of confusion and concern. Their reunion conclusion had clearly been disrupted by news that fundamentally altered their relationship to an institution they had long considered part of their family identity. By early afternoon, as I completed my first day's agenda at Westlake, I decided it was time to address the family situation directly. Thomas, as the self-appointed family spokesman, would be the logical first contact. His most recent message, received 30 minutes earlier, had abandoned any pretense of casual inquiry. Grace, this is urgent. Call immediately regarding Westlake situation. Family waiting for explanation. The family waiting suggested they had extended their stay at Pinehaven, delaying departures to collectively process this unexpected development. The image of them gathered in Diane's formal living room, letters from Westlake clutched in hand, expressions ranging from bewilderment to indignation, brought a distinct satisfaction that I acknowledged without shame. Rather than call, I decided a more direct approach was warranted. I'm going to stop by Pinehaven, I informed Patricia as we concluded our work. Better to address this situation in person. Want company? She offered, her expression suggesting she understood exactly what I would be facing. I think this is one family meeting I can handle on my own, I replied with a confidence that reflected my new position, both literally and figuratively. The drive to Pinehaven Estate was filled with memories of countless similar journeys. Holiday gatherings, summer barbecues, weekend brunches, each occasion reinforcing the family's internal hierarchy through 1,000 small interactions and arrangements. The basement room assignment had merely been the latest and most obvious manifestation of a pattern established over decades. As I approached the estate's entrance, I noted with satisfaction that several family members' cars remained in the circular driveway, confirmation that the Westlake announcement had indeed disrupted their departure plans. Thomas's Mercedes, Uncle George's Lexus, and, surprisingly, Marcus's Tesla were among the vehicles still present, suggesting this news had been deemed significant enough to delay even his return to the office. Instead of parking in the designated visitor area as usual, I deliberately positioned my car directly behind Diane's Jaguar, a small but meaningful departure from established protocol. The message was subtle but clear. I was no longer accepting assigned placement in the family's carefully ordered world. The front door opened before I could ring the bell, revealing Andrew, his expression a mix of confusion and intrigue. "Gracie," he said, using my childhood nickname with an uncertainty that suggested he was reassessing even this basic familiarity. "You came back." "I thought an in-person discussion might be helpful," I replied, stepping past him into the foyer without waiting for a formal invitation. "I assume everyone's gathered?" Andrew nodded, leading me toward the main living room. "They're processing the news. Thomas has been on the phone with his contact at Westlake for the past hour trying to get confirmation." "The press release went out at 10, I noted. "It's been public information since then." As we entered the living room, the scene that greeted me was exactly as I had imagined. Family members in various states of disbelief and consternation, gathered in conversational clusters, all discussion clearly centered on the Westlake situation. A collection of distinctive cream-colored envelopes bearing the Westlake logo lay scattered on the coffee table, the special delivery that had initiated this family crisis. Conversation ceased abruptly as I appeared in the doorway. All eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion to dawning comprehension. Thomas, phone still pressed to his ear, froze mid-sentence before muttering, "I'll call you back," and disconnecting. Aunt Diane rose from her position on the main sofa, her perfect posture and controlled expression betraying only the slightest tension around her eyes. "Grace, we thought you'd left for work commitments." "I did," I confirmed. My first day as Westlake's new owner involved numerous operational meetings, but I thought this development warranted a family discussion. The blunt confirmation sent a visible ripple through the room. Several family members exchanged glances, recalibrating their understanding of not just the current situation but years of interactions and assumptions. Thomas recovered first, stepping forward with the authoritative manner he employed in difficult negotiations. "Grace, what exactly is going on? These letters claim you've acquired Westlake through something called Artemis Partners. There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I replied calmly. "Artemis Partners is a holding company I established specifically for this acquisition. The purchase was finalized 3 months ago, with the formal announcement strategically scheduled for today." "But how?" Uncle George began, then hesitated, clearly reluctant to directly acknowledge the financial capacity such a purchase would require. "Westlake must be valued at approximately $72 million based on recent comparable properties and projected revenue streams," I supplied, "though the final terms remain confidential." The figure hung in the air, its implications rippling through the family's collective understanding. To access capital at that level implied a personal financial position dramatically different from what they had assumed, a discrepancy between perception and reality that challenged years of family narrative about my struggling post-divorce career. Marcus, who had remained unusually silent in a corner of the room, finally spoke. "Meridian Tech Solutions," he said, the statement carrying a weight of belated recognition. "The Forbes article mentioned a new valuation of $440 million. That was your company." The acknowledgement from my ex-husband, who had once characterized my business as a hobby that might eventually contribute to our household, carried a particular satisfaction. During our marriage, he had consistently framed my ambitions as secondary, my technological innovations as interesting but ultimately less significant than his legal career. "Yes," I confirmed simply. "That was my company." Diane's expression shifted subtly, recalibrating years of dismissive comments about my little tech venture against this new information. Why wasn't the family informed of this development? Westlake has been central to Taylor traditions for generations. The question perfectly encapsulated the family's fundamental assumption that significant decisions, even in my independent professional life, should be subject to family notification and potentially approval. The same expectation had never applied to Thomas's law firm expansion, Uncle George's property investments, or Marcus's career moves. "The acquisition was a business decision," I replied, maintaining a neutral tone. "Based on investment potential and strategic objectives, not family considerations." Thomas's expression hardened at this direct challenge to the family's assumed right to involvement. A business decision that directly impacts a club where multiple family members hold membership? Where Taylor events have been hosted for decades? Where our professional and social connections are centered? Precisely, I acknowledged. A club that rejected my individual membership application following my divorce, despite my professional qualifications and financial standing. A rejection influenced by family members on the membership committee who apparently felt a divorced woman running her own company didn't project the right image for Westlake. The directness of this statement created a momentary silence. Several family members glanced toward Uncle George, whose position on the membership committee had coincided with my rejection. His discomfort was evident in the slight flush creeping up his neck. That was a committee decision based on established protocols, he said defensively. Nothing personal. Of course, I agreed with deliberate pleasantness. Just as the basement room assignment this weekend was based on necessary arrangements rather than personal consideration. Established protocols often reveal underlying values quite clearly. Andrew, who had been observing this exchange with increasing discomfort, attempted to redirect toward practical matters. What does this mean for existing memberships? The letter mentions policy changes but doesn't provide specifics. The question offered a natural transition to the substantive changes planned for Westlake, a topic I was more than prepared to address. Existing memberships will be honored, I explained, but renewal will be subject to new criteria focused on merit and contribution, rather than background or connections. Westlake's future excellence depends on genuine inclusivity, not artificial exclusivity. Thomas's expression darkened at the implications. You're using ownership to implement some kind of social engineering experiment? Westlake's value is directly tied to its exclusivity and traditions. I'm aligning a valuable property with contemporary values and business practices, I corrected. Exclusivity based on merit enhances reputation and relevance. Exclusivity based on arbitrary social filters eventually becomes a liability. Marcus, who had been unusually quiet throughout this exchange, finally spoke again. This is personal, he said, his tone carrying the certainty of someone who believed he understood my motivations better than I did myself. It's about your membership rejection after our divorce. The attempt to reduce a complex business decision to emotional reaction was so predictable, I almost smiled. Throughout our marriage, Marcus had consistently framed my professional choices as emotional, rather than strategic, personal rather than rational, a subtle but persistent undermining of my business acumen. The acquisition is business, I replied evenly. The timing of this particular conversation, immediately following a reunion where I was assigned a basement room while the important family members received proper accommodations, that part might be slightly personal. The directness of this acknowledgement created another ripple of discomfort through the room. Diane's perfect posture stiffened further, her expression shifting between indignation and calculation as she reassessed years of interaction in light of my newly revealed position. If you felt your accommodations were inadequate, you could have said something, she said finally, her tone suggesting this was a reasonable response to my implicit criticism. The basement room wasn't a logistical issue, Diane, I replied. It was a symptom. Just as my membership rejection wasn't about club protocols, but about fundamental values. Both reflected the same underlying pattern, a family and social system that assigned value based on narrow definitions of success and contribution. Uncle George, ever the pragmatist, attempted to redirect the conversation toward damage control. What's done is done. The question now is how we move forward. The summer gala is next month, and the Taylor family has always had a prominent role. Will that continue under the new ownership? The question revealed exactly the priority I had anticipated. Not concern about the ethical implications of past exclusionary practices or interest in Westlake's future direction, but focused anxiety about the family's continued social prominence. The gala is being reconceptualized, I explained. It will continue as Westlake's signature event, but with a more inclusive approach to both participation and beneficiaries. The Taylor Family Foundation can certainly remain involved, provided its philanthropic focus aligns with the event's new direction. Thomas's expression suggested this was precisely the response he had feared. The family's automatic prominence. No longer guaranteed, their influence now conditional rather than assumed. The shifting power dynamic was palpable in the room. Decades of established hierarchy suddenly destabilized. "You could have approached this differently," he said, his tone carrying the first hints of what might have been genuine hurt beneath. The frustration. Brought the proposal to the family first, allowed for discussion and input before taking unilateral action that affects all of us. The complaint was so perfectly aligned with the family's established pattern that it brought unexpected clarity. Even now, faced with incontrovertible evidence of my professional success and financial autonomy, the expectation remained that significant decisions should be subject to family approval. The basement room assignment had been a physical manifestation of a much deeper dynamic, the persistent assumption that my choices required validation from those deemed more established or significant, the same way family decisions that affected me were brought for my discussion and input, I asked quietly. The way my divorce was treated as a personal failure rather than a necessary reclaiming of autonomy, the way my career has been consistently minimized as a little tech venture despite public evidence of its success? Andrew, who had maintained his position as sympathetic observer throughout this exchange, finally intervened. "We've clearly missed something important here," he acknowledged, glancing around at the family members with an expression that suggested genuine reflection. "Maybe instead of focusing on what Grace should have done differently, we should consider what we as a family have been getting wrong." This unexpected support from the most conventionally successful sibling, the one who had followed the prescribed Taylor path through law school to corporate practice, created a noticeable shift in the room's dynamics. Several family members, particularly the younger cousins who had remained silent during the confrontation, nodded in seeming agreement. Marcus, however, maintained his position of skepticism. "This is still about using financial leverage to settle personal scores," he insisted. "Acquiring a club that rejected you, then announcing it during a family reunion where you felt slighted. It's transparently vindictive." Before I could respond to this characterization, Diane unexpectedly intervened. "That's enough, Marcus," she said with surprising firmness. "Grace has evidently built something significant, whatever any of us might think about how she's chosen to reveal it. Continuing to question her motives becomes undignified at this point." The pragmatic reassessment was classic Diane, always attuned to shifting power dynamics, always adjusting to accommodate new realities that couldn't be changed. The same adaptability that had allowed her to maintain her position as family, matriarch through decades of transitions, was now being applied to this unexpected disruption of established hierarchy. "Thank you, Diane," I acknowledged, genuinely surprised by this limited but meaningful support. "I didn't come here to create additional conflict. I came because despite our differences, you are my family, and I felt you deserved to hear about Westlake directly from me rather than through public announcements or third parties." This framing, presenting my visit as consideration rather than confrontation, offered a path toward de-escalation while maintaining the new reality of our relative positions. The basement room occupant was now the owner of an institution, central to the family's social standing, and that fundamental shift could not be reversed or minimized regardless of how the conversation proceeded. Thomas, ever strategic even in retreat, recognized the changing terrain. "Well, what's done is done," he said, echoing Uncle George's earlier sentiment. "The question is where we go from here. The family has legitimate interests in Westlake that predate this acquisition. Connections, traditions, relationships built over generations. Those elements worth preserving will continue," I assured him. "Westlake's evolution doesn't require erasure of its history, only a more inclusive and merit-based approach to its future. The conversation gradually shifted toward practical considerations, questions about specific policy changes, transitional arrangements for existing members, and implications for scheduled events. As the initial shock and defensiveness subsided, the family's adaptability became evident, their attention turning toward understanding and potentially influencing the new reality rather than futilely challenging its existence. Marcus remained noticeably silent during this latter portion of the discussion, his expression unreadable as he observed the family's gradual acceptance of the transformed dynamic. When he finally spoke again, his question carried none of the dismissiveness that had characterized his earlier comments. "Did you plan this all along?" he asked quietly. "Even during our marriage, was building toward this kind of success and autonomy always the goal?" The question held layers of meaning, personal and professional, past and present intertwined in ways that could not be neatly separated. During our marriage, Marcus had consistently framed my business ambitions as potentially detrimental to our relationship, suggesting that success at his level was sufficient for both of us. The implicit assumption had always been that my professional pursuits were secondary, perhaps even self-indulgent given his established career. "I planned to build something meaningful on my own terms," I replied after a moment's consideration. The specific form that took evolved over time, but the fundamental drive for autonomy and impact, yes, that was always there. It's why our marriage ultimately couldn't work. This honest assessment created a moment of genuine connection, perhaps the first in years. As Marcus nodded slowly, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "I underestimated you," he acknowledged simply. "We all did." "Yes," I agreed without rancor. "You did." As the conversation wound toward its natural conclusion, family members gradually dispersed to adjust travel plans and process this significant recalibration of established dynamics. Diane approached as I prepared to leave, her expression suggesting she had already integrated this new reality into her understanding of family structure. "The basement room seems rather inappropriate in retrospect," she acknowledged, her tone maintaining dignity while conceding the point. "Perhaps next year we can arrange more suitable accommodations." The statement, with its underlying assumption that next year's reunion would proceed as usual, just with adjusted sleeping arrangements, revealed both the adaptability and limitations of the Taylor family perspective. Even now, the focus remained on symbolic adjustments rather than fundamental reassessment. "Next year remains to be seen," I replied noncommittally. "But I appreciate the recognition." As I left Pinehaven Estate, the weight of decades of family dynamics seemed to lift gradually from my shoulders. The basement room assignment had been merely a symptom of a much deeper pattern, a pattern now irrevocably disrupted by the revelation of my true position. Whatever relationship I maintained with the Taylor family moving forward would be fundamentally different, based on mutual recognition rather than inherited hierarchy. Driving back toward downtown Oakridge, I thought about the parallel transformations unfolding: Westlake Country Club evolving toward genuine merit-based exclusivity, the Taylor family recalibrating its internal structures in response to revealed realities, and my own continued journey toward fully integrated authenticity across personal and professional domains. The basement room, with its dehumidifier and Christmas decorations, now seemed less an indignity than a perfect final manifestation of a pattern that had run its course. In many ways, I had needed that assignment, that tangible, unmistakable reminder of how the family perceived my place in their carefully constructed hierarchy, to fully embrace the public revelation that would fundamentally transform those perceptions. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath my downtown apartment building, my phone signaled an incoming text from Patricia. "How did the family meeting go?" "About as expected," I replied. Initial shock, followed by strategic adjustment to new realities. The Taylor family has always been adaptable when necessary. Her response came quickly. "And the basement room resident?" I smiled at the shorthand reference we had developed during planning discussions. Officially graduated to more appropriate accommodations in the family consciousness. Though I suspect holiday gatherings will be interesting for the foreseeable future. That evening, as I watched the sunset transform Oakridge's skyline from my apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows, I reflected on the weekend's journey from basement room to boardroom. The handwritten note stating Grace Basement Room had indeed been the catalyst, but the transformation it ignited had been years in the making, built through countless decisions to pursue my own path, despite family expectations, to value my vision even when others dismissed it, to recognize that true success required integration of personal and professional authenticity, rather than compartmentalization to accommodate others' comfort. The Taylor family reunion had provided the perfect context for this culmination, a concentrated experience of established patterns that clarified exactly why transformation was necessary. Without the basement room assignment, without the cumulative weight of a weekend's worth of small exclusions and dismissals, the revelation of Westlake's new ownership might have felt like mere business success rather than profound personal reclamation. As night settled over the city, lights illuminating office buildings and residences in patterns that suggested both structure and possibility, I began drafting notes for Westlake's new membership criteria, guidelines that would value contribution over connection, merit over background, potential over pedigree. The Taylor family would adapt to this new reality because adaptation was their fundamental survival skill, but the institution itself would be transformed in ways that extended far beyond one family's recalibrated hierarchy. The basement room resident had indeed graduated, not just to a different sleeping arrangement at next year's reunion, but to a fundamentally different understanding of her place in both family and professional contexts. The evolution wasn't about revenge or vindication, despite Marcus's initial characterization. It was about alignment, creating external realities that matched internal truths rather than continuing to navigate unnecessary contradictions between public perception and private achievement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at Westlake, implementing structural changes, managing member expectations, balancing respect for tradition with commitment to evolution. But tonight, watching the city lights mirror the stars emerging above, I allowed myself to fully appreciate the journey from basement to boardroom, from accommodation to ownership, from assigned placement to self-determination. The handwritten note saying Grace Basement Room would remain a powerful reminder, not of family limitations, but of the clarity that comes from seeing patterns fully revealed. Sometimes the most restrictive spaces provide the perfect perspective from which to envision boundless possibility, and sometimes the most dismissive treatment offers the precise motivation needed to reveal your true capacity, not just to others, but more importantly, to yourself. The following weeks unfolded with the swift precision of carefully laid plans, finally set in motion. Each morning, I arrived at Westlake Country Club not through the side entrance that had once been designated for vendors and staff, but through the grand main doors that had previously felt forbidden despite my family connection. The transformation in how I was received proved even more dramatic than the change in physical access. "Good morning, Ms. Taylor," the front desk staff would greet me, their tones carrying a new note of deference that occasionally bordered on overcorrection. Among the employees who had witnessed my previous rejection, there was sometimes an undertone of satisfaction. At this reversal of fortune, a subtle solidarity expressed through knowing glances and small gestures of support. Maria Fernandez, the head of housekeeping who had confirmed my suspicions about my ex-father-in-law's role in blocking my membership, had taken to leaving fresh flowers in my office each morning. When I thanked her for this unnecessary but appreciated touch, she had simply smiled and said, "The club feels different now. Better, like fresh air after a storm." My office, previously the club president's sacred domain with its mahogany paneling and views of the first tee, had undergone subtle but significant changes. I'd replaced the hunting prints and portraits of past presidents, all men, predominantly in their 60s and 70s, with contemporary art from local artists, many from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented at Westlake. The heavy curtains had been removed to allow natural light to flood the space, a physical manifestation of the transparency I intended to bring to club operations. The membership committee, previously the gatekeepers of Westlake's carefully maintained exclusivity, had been reconstituted with new guidelines and several new members selected for their professional accomplishments rather than social connections. Their first meeting under my ownership had been notably tense, with several longtime committee members clearly uncomfortable with the new diversity requirements I had implemented. These changes fundamentally alter Westlake's character. Harold Blackwood, a committee member for over 20 years, had objected during that initial meeting. The membership has certain expectations about who they'll encounter on the grounds. Exactly the issue we're addressing, I had replied evenly. Expectations based on arbitrary social factors rather than merit and contribution create artificial limitations that ultimately diminish the club's value and relevance. By the third week, 3 committee members had resigned in protest, exactly as Patricia and I had anticipated during our planning. Their departures created openings for new perspectives, including Dr. Amara Johnson, a neurosurgeon whose membership application had been under review for nearly 2 years despite her impeccable professional credentials and community standing. "I almost withdrew my application last month," she confided after accepting the committee position. The continual delays and additional requirements made it increasingly clear that something other than my qualifications was being evaluated. Her experience mirrored so many others. Accomplished professionals whose backgrounds or personal circumstances didn't align with Westlake's unwritten but rigorously enforced demographic preferences. Under previous leadership, these applicants had been discouraged through a variety of tactics, from excessive delays to impossible reference requirements to provisional statuses that somehow never became permanent. The operational changes extended beyond membership policies to every aspect of club function. The staff wage structure had been completely overhauled to eliminate disparities that had created a 2-tiered system where customer-facing positions received significantly better compensation than behind-the-scenes roles. The new pay scale valued contribution rather than visibility, expertise rather than appearance. "This changes everything for my team," Eduardo Martinez, the head groundskeeper, had told me after reviewing the new compensation framework. "For the first time, their specialized knowledge and skills are being valued properly." These internal transformations had proceeded largely as planned, meeting the expected mix of resistance and support. The external response, however, had proven more complicated than anticipated, particularly from the Taylor family. 2 weeks after the revelation at Pinehaven Estate, Thomas had reached out with an invitation that surprised me both in its timing and nature. "Dinner at Hartwell's, Tuesday at 7 toy, just you and me. Professional discussion regarding Westlake," his message had stated with characteristic brevity. Hartwell's was Oakridge's premier restaurant, the kind of establishment where business deals and political alliances were forged over expertly prepared cuisine and discreet service. The choice of venue suggested Thomas was approaching this as a negotiation between equals rather than a family matter, a significant shift from his previous positioning. I had accepted with equal brevity, curious about what professional discussion might entail after the family's initial reaction to my acquisition. The Thomas who greeted me at Hartwell's appeared subtly different from the commanding presence, who had directed the family reunion with military precision. His handshake was firm but not dominating, his expression suggesting calculation rather than certainty. "Grace," he said, as we were seated at a prime corner table that offered both privacy and status. "Thank you for making time in what must be a busy schedule." "Of course," I replied, noting the careful neutrality in his tone. "Your message mentioned a professional discussion about Westlake." Thomas nodded, waiting until the sommelier had presented and poured the wine he'd pre-ordered before continuing. I've been speaking with several long-standing members who have concerns about the direction of the club under new ownership. They've asked me to represent their interests in a constructive dialogue with you. The positioning was classic Thomas, establishing himself as spokesperson for important interests, implying authority without directly claiming it. During our childhood, he had perfected this approach, presenting his preferences as collective, family decisions in which he merely served as messenger. Interesting that they'd select you as their representative, I observed, given that your family connection to the new owner might create conflicting loyalties. A flicker of appreciation crossed his features, acknowledgement that I had immediately recognized and named the contradiction in his positioning. Perhaps that family connection is precisely why they chose me. Someone who understands both perspectives and has a vested interest in finding workable solutions. The logic was impeccable on its surface, but I recognized the underlying maneuver. Thomas was attempting to leverage our family relationship to gain influence over Westlake's direction, while simultaneously elevating his standing among concerned members by positioning himself as their access point to the new ownership. I appreciate hearing members' perspectives, I said carefully. The board has established formal channels for feedback during this transition. I'm surprised these individuals felt the need for separate representation. Thomas took a measured sip of his wine before responding. Some concerns are difficult to express through formal channels, particularly when they involve fundamental questions about institutional identity and tradition. Meaning? Meaning there are members who have invested decades in Westlake, who value certain established patterns of operation and association. They worry that rapid changes might undermine what makes the club special to them. The careful phrasing contained volumes, the established patterns being precisely the exclusionary practices I was dismantling, the special qualities being the homogeneity that had been carefully maintained through selective membership policies. Change can be uncomfortable, I acknowledged, particularly when it challenges long-standing arrangements that have benefited certain groups at others' expense. Thomas's expression tightened slightly at this direct characterization. That's a rather pointed way of describing traditions that have sustained the club's excellence for generations. Is it? The membership committee has rejected qualified applicants based on unwritten demographic preferences, while accepting less accomplished candidates with the right connections. Staff compensation has systematically undervalued behind-the-scenes roles predominantly held by people of color. Even the club's charitable foundation has directed funds primarily to organizations with board members connected to Westlake leadership. The systematic enumeration of these practices, delivered without accusation but with unflinching clarity, created a moment of tension. Thomas had clearly expected a more abstract discussion about balancing progress with tradition rather than specific identification of problematic patterns. These are complex historical developments with contexts that might not be immediately apparent, he said finally. The members I'm representing simply want assurance that changes will be implemented, with appropriate respect for the club's established culture. I studied my cousin across the table, noting how different this dynamic was from our interactions at the family reunion just weeks earlier. There, he had directed my movements with unquestioned authority, assigning me to the basement room with the casual certainty of someone who knew his judgment would not be challenged. Now, he was carefully modulating his approach, seeking influence rather than assuming control. Westlake's culture is evolving to reflect contemporary values and legal standards, I replied. The aspects worth preserving, excellence, community, meaningful tradition, will continue. Practices that cannot be justified on merit will not. Throughout dinner, our conversation continued in this vein, Thomas attempting to establish himself as a necessary bridge between traditional members and new leadership, me consistently redirecting toward established governance processes and merit-based standards. By dessert, It had become clear that his professional discussion was less about representing concerned members than about securing his own continued influence within an institution central to his social and professional standing. "You've clearly given these matters considerable thought," he conceded as we concluded the meal. "But I hope you'll remember that family connections have always been Westlake's foundation. The Taylor legacy at the club spans generations." "I'm acutely aware of the Taylor connection to Westlake," I assured him. "It's precisely why ensuring its evolution toward genuine excellence and inclusivity matters to me personally as well as professionally." As we parted outside Hartwell's, Thomas offered a handshake that felt like a reassessment. "You've changed," he observed, studying me with newfound consideration. "It's not just the business success or the Westlake acquisition. There's something different in how you engage." The observation was more perceptive than I had expected from a cousin who had spent years viewing me primarily as a supporting character in the Taylor family narrative. "Not changed," I corrected gently. "Revealed. This has always been who I am when not accommodating others' expectations." Thomas's dinner invitation proved to be just the first in a series of approaches from family members, each attempting in their own way to recalibrate their relationship to me in light of the Westlake revelation. Uncle George requested a golf game to discuss family philanthropy opportunities at the club. Cousin Jennifer, who had barely acknowledged me at the reunion, suddenly discovered an interest in my tech industry insights for her son's college applications. Even Aunt Diane reached out with an invitation to her annual charity luncheon, notable because I had been consistently excluded from this event since my divorce. Most surprising was Marcus's approach, which came not through direct contact, but via a formal letter delivered to my office at Westlake. Written on his law firm's stationery, it congratulated me on the acquisition in professionally appropriate terms before shifting to a more personal note. In retrospect, I recognize that our marriage faltered in part because I failed to fully appreciate your vision and ambition. While that recognition comes too late for us, I hope it might allow for a more constructive relationship moving forward, particularly given our continued connection through family and now Westlake. The acknowledgement was unexpected. Marcus had consistently framed our divorce as the result of my prioritization issues rather than his inability to support my professional goals. Whether this new perspective represented genuine insight or strategic adaptation to changed circumstances remained unclear, but the shift itself was noteworthy. I responded with similar formality, acknowledging his congratulations, and agreeing that a constructive professional relationship would benefit all parties given our overlapping contexts. The measured response reflected my new approach to family interactions, engaged but bounded, present but not automatically accommodating. Throughout these family recalibrations, Patricia had served as both strategic advisor and reality check, her perspective untainted by the emotional complexities of Taylor family dynamics. "They're all jockeying for position in the new reality," she observed after I recounted Thomas's dinner overture. "Testing to see how your success might benefit them, while simultaneously adjusting to the disruption of established hierarchy. And looking for ways to influence Westlake's direction," I added. Thomas practically appointed himself ambassador for concerned members who mysteriously share all his specific preferences. Patricia laughed at this transparent maneuver. "Classic. He's trying to maintain his social capital by positioning himself as the family's access point to you. Watch for more of that. Family members attempting to monetize their connection to the new owner in various currencies, from social standing to business opportunities." Her prediction proved prescient as additional family approaches emerged, each flavored by the individual's particular relationship to both me and Westlake. The underlying pattern remained consistent, attempts to establish special access or influence, based on family connection rather than merit or relevant expertise. I addressed these overtures with a consistent approach, maintaining family relationships while establishing clear boundaries around Westlake governance. Family members were welcome to participate in club activities and provide feedback through established channels, but family connection would confer no special influence over club direction or operations. This clarity created some initial friction, particularly with those who had historically leveraged their Taylor name for preferential treatment at the club. Cousin Philip, whose habit of showing up without reservations and expecting immediate accommodation was legendary among Westlake staff, experienced a particularly difficult adjustment. "I've been coming here for 20 years, he protested when informed that the reserved seating area he preferred was fully booked for a scheduled event. "The Taylors have always been accommodated. Members are accommodated based on availability and reservation policies," the dining room manager explained, having been empowered under new management to enforce rules consistently regardless of member name or connection. "I'd be happy to seat you in the garden section, which has immediate availability." The incident, reported to me through the weekly operational review rather than special notification, represented exactly the shift I had intended. Privilege would be based on behavior and contribution rather than name or connection. Standards would apply consistently rather than selectively, and staff would be supported in maintaining these principles rather than pressured to make exceptions. While navigating these family recalibrations, I remained focused on implementing Westlake's broader transformation. The summer gala, scheduled for the 6th weekend after my acquisition announcement, would serve as the public debut of the club's new direction. The events planning committee, reconstituted to include diverse perspectives, had developed a vision that maintained the gala's elegance while significantly expanding its accessibility and purpose. Instead of $1,000 minimum donations primarily benefiting organizations with board connections to Westlake members, we're implementing a tiered attendance structure, explained Sophia Winters, the committee's new chair and a respected community advocate. This allows participation at various levels while directing funds to organizations selected for impact rather than connection. The revised gala would feature local artists and performers previously excluded from Westlake events, highlight businesses owned by women and people of color through catering and service contracts, and showcase the substantive community partnerships being developed under new ownership. The event would maintain the excellence expected of Westlake while demonstrating that such excellence could be achieved through inclusion rather than exclusion. As gala preparations accelerated, family approaches continued, now focused specifically on securing preferred roles or visibility at this high-profile event. Thomas inquired about chairing the welcome committee. Uncle George suggested his foundation should receive special recognition during the program, and Aunt Diane offered to curate the guest list to ensure appropriate community representation, all thinly veiled attempts to maintain their traditional influence over Westlake's most significant social gathering. Each offer was acknowledged with appreciation and redirected to the established committee processes. The planning committee has developed comprehensive frameworks for each aspect of the event, I explained consistently. They're considering all offers of assistance based on relevant expertise and alignment with this year's vision. This standardized response created visible frustration among family members accustomed to automatic deference. During a chance encounter at Oakridge's downtown farmers market, Aunt Diane made her displeasure explicit. "The gala has always had Taylor family leadership," she noted, her tone suggesting this tradition carried the weight of natural law. "It seems unnecessarily disruptive to change fundamental arrangements that have served the event well for decades." The committee includes individuals with extensive event planning experience and deep community connections, I replied evenly. Their collaborative approach is producing an innovative vision that honors tradition while embracing positive change. Positive change, Diane repeated with subtle emphasis that questioned the descriptor. I suppose that's one perspective. Others might see unnecessary dismantling of effective systems. Effective for whom? I asked directly. The gala has historically been accessible only to those with significant financial resources and social connections, benefiting organizations already well supported through member networks. The revised approach expands both participation and impact. The exchange highlighted the fundamental disconnect at the heart of family reactions to Westlake's transformation. From their perspective, the club's existing systems weren't broken, but optimized, designed precisely to maintain the exclusivity and preference they valued. My changes weren't improvements, but disruptions to a carefully calibrated social ecosystem that had served their interests effectively for generations. 2 weeks before the gala, the family's scattered individual approaches coalesced into a more coordinated effort. Thomas requested a formal meeting to discuss Taylor family participation in the upcoming event, copying several family members on the email to signal collective concern rather than personal interest. I agreed to the meeting but moved it from my Westlake office, where it might suggest special access, to a neutral conference room at the club, and included Sophia Winters and 2 other gala committee members to ensure transparency. This structure transformed what Thomas had likely envisioned as a private family negotiation into an official committee consultation with multiple perspectives present. When Thomas arrived with Uncle George and Aunt Diane in tow, their momentary surprise at finding the committee members already seated and prepared with agenda and materials was quickly masked behind practiced social poise. We appreciate this opportunity to discuss family participation in this important tradition, Thomas began, assuming the role of spokesperson without consultation. The committee welcomes input from long-standing members, Sophia responded with professional courtesy. As you know, we've been working to ensure the gala reflects both Westlake's heritage and its evolving vision. What followed was a masterclass in contrasting approaches to influence. Thomas outlined the family's traditional roles in the event, from greeting select guests to introducing key speakers to presenting ceremonial donations, framing these functions as essential to maintaining the character and standing of Westlake's signature gathering. Uncle George emphasized the historical connection between the Taylor Family Foundation and gala beneficiaries, while Aunt Diane offered detailed opinions on everything from table arrangements to invitation design. Throughout their presentations, I observed a consistent theme: the assumption that Taylor family preferences should automatically receive priority consideration regardless of relevant expertise or alignment with the event's established direction. It was precisely this assumption that had shaped my basement room assignment at the reunion, that had influenced my membership rejection after my divorce, that had characterized family interactions throughout my adult life. When they concluded, Sophia and her committee members responded with respectful attention but clear boundaries. We've incorporated historical elements that enhance the event while adjusting aspects that limited participation or impact, Sophia explained, directing them to the comprehensive planning documents. Family members with relevant expertise or perspective are welcome to contribute through the same processes established for all members. The response was measured and appropriate, but the family's expressions revealed their distinct discomfort with being treated as regular members rather than automatic authorities. This fundamental recalibration, from assumed special status to earned participation, represented precisely the shift I had envisioned when acquiring Westlake. As the meeting concluded, Thomas lingered, waiting until the committee members had departed before addressing me directly. "This approach feels unnecessarily adversarial," he said, his tone suggesting reasonable concern rather than self-interest. "The family has always had a special relationship with Westlake. Treating long-standing traditions as problems to be solved rather than values to be preserved creates division where collaboration should prevail." The framing was skillful, positioning the family's desire for continued preferential treatment as collaboration while characterizing equal treatment as adversarial. It was the same rhetorical strategy that had been used throughout my life to characterize my pursuit of autonomy and recognition as problematic rather than reasonable. "The committee isn't addressing traditions as problems," I clarified. "They're ensuring that participation and influence are based on relevant contribution rather than historical precedent or family connection. That standard applies to everyone, including me. Thomas studied me with the calculating assessment of someone recalibrating a negotiating position. You've achieved your objective, Grace. Westlake is yours. The family understands that reality. But sustaining success requires more than ownership. It requires maintaining the social ecosystem that gives the club its value. The Taylor connection has been central to that ecosystem for generations. The observation contained both acknowledgement and subtle threat, recognition of my achievement coupled with implied consequences should I continue disrupting established patterns. It reflected the family's fundamental belief that their preferential treatment wasn't privilege but essential infrastructure, not special accommodation but natural order. Westlake's value comes from excellence, integrity, and meaningful community, I replied evenly. Those qualities don't require preferential treatment based on family name or connection. They require consistent standards applied with transparency and purpose. As Thomas departed, his expression suggested our conversation had confirmed what he already suspected, that the basement room resident had not simply achieved financial success, but undergone a more fundamental transformation that made previous methods of influence ineffective. The realization was evident in his posture, in the calculating reassessment behind his eyes, in the slight adjustment of his approach as he processed this new reality. The weeks leading up to the gala brought increasing evidence of the Taylor family's strategic adaptation. Having recognized that direct influence through family connection was no longer automatic, they shifted toward demonstrating relevant expertise and constructive contribution, precisely the merit-based approach I had established as Westlake's new standard. Cousin Jennifer, who had previously shown little interest in community engagement, suddenly volunteered for the gala's outreach committee, leveraging her public relations background to help develop communication strategies for new audiences. Uncle George refocused his foundation's grant-making toward organizations aligned with the gala's expanded beneficiary criteria, then highlighted these changes in his committee input. Even Thomas adjusted his approach, offering specific legal expertise regarding expanded participation structures rather than general assertions about traditional arrangements. This evolution, from expecting automatic deference to demonstrating actual value, represented exactly the transformation I had hoped to inspire beyond Westlake's immediate operations. The shift wasn't just about club policies, but about fundamental approaches to participation and contribution in all contexts. Patricia noted this development with characteristic insight during our weekly strategy meeting. They're adapting to merit-based standards because you've made clear nothing else will work, she observed. That's significant progress. Behavior change often precedes genuine perspective shift. It's still primarily strategic, I acknowledged. They're adjusting to new rules rather than embracing the underlying values. For now, she agreed. But sustained behavioral change eventually influences perspective. They're experiencing firsthand that merit-based systems can work effectively, that contribution matters more than connection. That experience will gradually reshape assumptions even if the initial motivation was self-interest. Her observation highlighted the deeper purpose behind Westlake's transformation, not simply correcting my personal membership rejection or challenging family hierarchy, but demonstrating through concrete example that systems based on merit, rather than arbitrary preference, could maintain excellence while expanding opportunity. As the gala approached, this demonstration gained momentum. The expanded planning committee, selected for relevant expertise rather than social connection, had developed an event that promised to maintain Westlake's tradition of elegance while significantly broadening both participation and impact. Community partners previously excluded from the club's orbit reported meaningful engagement rather than superficial outreach. Staff members noted improved working conditions and recognition under the revised event structure. The Taylor family's Adaptation continued as well, with members increasingly focusing on demonstrating actual contribution rather than asserting entitled position. This evolution wasn't universal or without resistance. Several family members maintained their distance, uncomfortable with arrangements that didn't automatically prioritize their preferences. But the direction of change was clear and consistent. 3 days before the gala, as final preparations accelerated, I received an unexpected visit from Andrew. Unlike other family members who had approached with specific agenda or strategic purpose, my brother arrived without appointment or pretense, asking simply if I had time for coffee. We settled in Westlake's newly renovated terrace cafe, which had replaced the former members-only lounge with a space that maintained privacy while eliminating arbitrary exclusion. The setting itself represented the balanced approach I had implemented throughout the club, preserving quality while removing unnecessary barriers. "The place looks good," Andrew observed, glancing around at the tasteful renovations. "Different, but not unrecognizable." "That's the intention," I acknowledged. "Evolution rather than erasure." Andrew nodded, studying me with the direct attention that had characterized our childhood connection before adult complexities intervened. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, "not just for the basement room, though that too, but for years of not seeing what was happening." The unexpected directness created a moment of genuine connection amid weeks of strategic family recalibrations. Unlike other relatives whose approaches had been calculated to secure advantage in the new reality, Andrews seemed motivated by authentic reflection. "What do you mean?" I asked, curious about his specific realization. "The family has a pattern." "With you," he explained, choosing his words carefully. "Minimizing your accomplishments, dismissing your perspectives, treating your choices as problematic rather than different. I participated in that pattern without questioning it, accepting the family narrative rather than seeing the situation clearly." The acknowledgement was surprisingly affecting, not because it revealed anything I hadn't known, but because it represented genuine recognition rather than strategic repositioning. After weeks of family members attempting to leverage connection or influence without addressing underlying dynamics, Andrew's simple acknowledgement of the pattern itself felt like breakthrough. "Thank you for saying that," I responded after a moment. The pattern became clear to me gradually, but seeing it and addressing it are different challenges. "The Westlake acquisition made the pattern impossible to ignore," Andrew acknowledged. Suddenly, the struggling sister who needed to be accommodated in the basement was revealed as substantially more successful than anyone had acknowledged. It forced a collective reckoning with how thoroughly we'd misunderstood or misrepresented your reality. This candid assessment of the family's collective recalibration offered valuable perspective on the varied approaches I'd experienced since. The revelation, the strategic overtures, the attempts at special influence, the gradual adaptation to merit-based standards, all represented different responses to this fundamental disruption of established narrative. "And you?" I asked, curious about his personal process amid this collective adjustment. "How are you processing the revelation?" Andrew smiled with genuine self-awareness. "Mostly by recognizing how easily I accepted convenience over reality. It was simpler to go along with the family's assessment of your situation than to question assumptions or challenge patterns. That compliance makes me part of the problem, regardless of intention." The conversation continued with unusual honesty, exploring the family dynamics that had shaped our respective experiences and choices. Unlike interactions with other relatives focused on securing position or influence in the new reality, this exchange centered on understanding rather than advantage, recognition rather than strategy. As we concluded our coffee, Andrew offered a final observation that illuminated the broader significance of recent developments. "What you've done with Westlake isn't just about changing a club or challenging family hierarchy," he noted. "It's about demonstrating a different approach to determining value and opportunity. The basement room resident revealed not just as successful, but as the architect of a system that measures worth by contribution rather than category. The insight captured precisely what I had hoped to achieve beyond personal vindication or institutional transformation, a concrete demonstration that excellence and inclusion could coexist, that merit-based standards could maintain quality while expanding opportunity, that contribution rather than connection could determine appropriate influence and recognition. As Andrew departed with a goodbye that felt more like reconnection than conclusion, I reflected on the journey from basement room to this moment of genuine understanding. The transformation wasn't just about my changed status or the family's strategic adaptation, but about the possibility of evolving from inherited patterns to intentional principles, from assumed hierarchy to demonstrated value. The gala would showcase this evolution publicly, but these individual recalibrations, from Thomas's strategic repositioning to Andrew's genuine recognition, revealed its deeper significance. The basement room assignment had indeed been a catalyst, not just for revealing success previously hidden, but for demonstrating through lived example that systems based on merit rather than arbitrary preference could benefit everyone willing to adapt from entitled expectation to meaningful contribution. The evening of the Westlake Country Club Summer Gala arrived with perfect timing. Clear skies, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of late summer blooms, and a sunset that promised to transform the club's grounds into a canvas of gold and crimson. I stood in my office, watching the final preparations through windows that now offered unobstructed views of both the meticulously maintained grounds and the bustling city skyline beyond, a deliberate design choice that symbolized Westlake's new connection to the broader community rather than isolation from it. "Everything's ready," Patricia announced, joining me at the window. At 62, my mentor brought decades of executive presence to her role as my strategic advisor, her silver hair styled in a sleek bob that complemented her emerald evening gown. "The committee has outdone themselves." Indeed, the transformation, visible from my vantage point, confirmed that assessment. The traditional white tents that had housed previous galas remained, their elegant silhouettes illuminated by thousands of twinkling lights. But where previous events had featured restricted VIP sections and rigid seating arrangements that physically manifested social hierarchy, this year's design created flowing, interconnected spaces that encouraged mingling across traditional boundaries, while maintaining the event's sophisticated atmosphere. "It looks beautiful," I agreed, turning from the window to face the full-length mirror mounted on my office wall, another addition that had replaced a portrait of Westlake's founding president. The woman reflected back at me bore little resemblance to the basement room resident of just months earlier. My midnight blue gown, custom designed by an up-and-coming Oakridge designer who had previously been excluded from Westlake vendor opportunities, featured clean lines and subtle details that conveyed confidence without ostentation. "You look like exactly what you are," Patricia observed with approval. "The woman who owns the place." The observation captured the evening's fundamental purpose beyond its charitable aims and social significance. This gala would serve as my official debut as Westlake's owner in the broader Oakridge community, the public crystallization of the transformation that had begun with that handwritten note saying, "Grace Basement Room," just months earlier. "Time to greet our guests," I said, gathering the small clutch that contained my speaking notes for the evening. "The Taylor family contingent should be arriving soon." That the family would attend in significant numbers had been confirmed through formal RSVPs rather than assumed presence, another departure from previous years, when their participation had been automatically accommodated regardless of official deadlines or capacity considerations. Their attendance represented both curiosity about the club's new direction and strategic adaptation to changed circumstances, a collective decision to engage with rather than boycott the transformed institution, despite their diminished automatic influence. As Patricia and I made our way toward the main entrance where the welcoming committee was assembling, I reflected on how differently I moved through these spaces now compared to my previous experiences at Westlake. Before my divorce, I had been Marcus's +1, expected to complement his presence rather than establish my own. After the rejection of my membership application, I had been effectively excluded from these grounds entirely. My connection to the club severed despite my family's continued prominence within its social ecosystem. Now, as owner and strategic visionary, I traversed these same paths with a confidence born not just of formal authority, but of alignment between external position and internal purpose. The changes implemented over recent months, from membership criteria to staff compensation to community engagement, reflected values I had always held but previously lacked the platform to fully express. The transformation wasn't about becoming someone new, but about creating contexts where my authentic self could operate without artificial constraint. At the main entrance, Sophia Winters was coordinating the welcoming committee, a diverse group that included long-standing members alongside new additions selected through the revised application process. Gone was the previous practice of having only the club's most prominent members greet guests, replaced by a rotation that valued commitment and contribution, regardless of social standing. "Everything's proceeding beautifully," Sophia reported, her enthusiasm evident beneath her professional demeanor. "The check-in process is working smoothly, and the expanded transportation options are allowing much broader participation than previous years." This last point referenced another significant change. Where previous galas had assumed private vehicle arrival with valet service, this year's event had implemented shuttle services from central city locations, reducing barriers for attendees who might not own cars or prefer public transportation. The adjustment maintained the event's elegance while eliminating unnecessary obstacles to participation. As the first guests began to arrive, the effectiveness of these changes became immediately apparent. Alongside the luxury vehicles that had traditionally dominated Westlake's circular drive, shuttle buses delivered attendees from diverse backgrounds who might previously have been excluded by transportation limitations alone. The resulting mix created exactly the atmosphere I had envisioned: sophisticated but accessible, exclusive based on interest and contribution rather than arbitrary social filters. I greeted early arrivals alongside the welcoming committee, noting with satisfaction how the revised approach created a more authentic atmosphere than the staged formality of previous years. Conversations flowed naturally rather than adhering to rigid social scripts. Connections formed based on shared interests rather than predetermined status, and the collective energy reflected genuine engagement rather than obligatory appearance. "They're here," Patricia murmured discreetly as a group of luxury vehicles approached the entrance in close succession. The Taylor family had arrived, their coordinated timing suggesting pre-planned staging rather than coincidental convergence. Thomas emerged from the lead car, impeccable in custom evening wear that signaled both tradition and authority. Aunt Diane followed from the second vehicle, her entrance calculated for maximum impact, while Uncle George and several cousins completed the family contingent. Marcus had RSVP'd separately, indicating he would be arriving with his current wife, Vanessa, at a slightly later time, a detail that suggested continued strategic positioning within both family and social contexts. "Grace," Thomas greeted me with the careful cordiality he had adopted since our post-revelation dinner. "The club looks exceptional. You and your team have clearly invested considerable thought in tonight's arrangements." The compliment was delivered with studied neutrality, acknowledging quality without explicitly endorsing change, recognizing effort without connecting it to specific reforms. It perfectly captured Thomas's evolved approach to our relationship, a calibrated balance between acknowledgement of my position and reservation about my direction. "Thank you," I replied with equal measure. The committee has worked tirelessly to create an event that honors tradition while embracing positive evolution. I'm particularly pleased with how they've expanded participation while maintaining the excellence Westlake is known for. As family members moved through the greeting process, each interaction revealed their individual adjustment to the transformed dynamic. Aunt Diane's approach combined practiced social grace with strategic assessment, her compliments on the event's aesthetics carefully separated from its structural changes. Uncle George focused on financial aspects, noting the increased attendance, with the calculating eye of someone evaluating investment performance rather than social significance. Younger cousins, less entrenched in traditional patterns, adapted more readily to the new reality, engaging genuinely with committee members and expressing authentic interest in the event's expanded focus. Their reactions suggested generational differences in how family members experienced and responded to Westlake's transformation, a pattern that mirrored broader social evolutions beyond the club's specific context. As the Taylor contingent proceeded toward the main event area, I noted Marcus's arrival with Vanessa, their entrance timed to avoid direct interaction with family members while maintaining visibility within the broader social context. The strategic separation reflected the complex dynamics that persisted beyond our divorce, his position within both family and professional circles, requiring careful navigation of potentially competing loyalties and narratives. Throughout the arrival period, I maintained the balanced presence I had cultivated since the Westlake acquisition, engaged but not dominating, accessible but not indiscriminately available, connected to the Taylor family context without being defined by it. This approach reflected the fundamental recalibration I had implemented across multiple domains, aligning external interactions with internal values rather than accommodating others' expectations at personal expense. As the scheduled program approached, I moved toward the main tent where the formal portion of the evening would unfold. The space had been transformed from previous year's rigid hierarchy, with premium tables near the stage reserved for the club's most prominent members regardless of their charitable contribution, to an arrangement that prioritized major donors and community partners without creating visible tiers of exclusivity. Patricia joined me at the committee table, positioned among rather than above other attendees, another departure from tradition that physically manifested Westlake's evolving approach to leadership and community. The Taylor family has secured a table near the center, she noted, scanning the filling room with practiced assessment. Not at the front where they've traditionally been placed, but positioned for optimal visibility and connection. The observation highlighted their continued strategic adaptation, accepting changed circumstances while maximizing advantage within new parameters, recognizing they could no longer assume automatic premium placement but ensuring optimal positioning through appropriate contribution. It represented precisely the merit-based approach I had implemented throughout Westlake's operations, with influence flowing from demonstrated value rather than inherited status. As guests settled into their seats, the energy in the room reflected this fundamental shift from obligatory appearance to genuine engagement. Conversations flowed across traditional social boundaries, connections formed based on shared interests rather than predetermined groups, and the collective atmosphere suggested authentic community rather than segregated coexistence. Sophia approached our table with a final update before the program began. "We've exceeded both attendance and donation projections," she reported with contained excitement. "The expanded participation model has actually increased total contributions while significantly broadening community engagement. This confirmation of what I had consistently maintained throughout Westlake's transformation, that inclusion and excellence could reinforce rather than undermine each other, provided perfect context for the evening's formal program. The changes implemented over recent months weren't just ideologically satisfying, but pragmatically effective, creating measurable improvements across multiple performance indicators. As I rose to deliver the evening's welcome address, I scanned the room with awareness of both its historical context and present transformation. The Taylor family occupied their strategically selected table with the practiced poise of people accustomed to public scrutiny, their expressions revealing various mixtures of curiosity, assessment, and strategic adaptation. Marcus and Vanessa maintained careful separation while ensuring visibility, their positioning reflecting complex navigation of personal and professional considerations. Beyond these familiar figures stretched a gathering substantially different from previous Westlake galas. More diverse in background and perspective, more genuinely engaged with the event's purpose, more authentically connected across traditional boundaries. The transformation was visible not just in demographic composition, but in the quality of interaction, the nature of engagement, the authentic rather than performative participation. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sophisticated sound system that had replaced Westlake's outdated audio equipment. "Welcome to the Westlake Summer Gala, an event with deep roots in our community's history, and equally meaningful branches reaching toward its future." The intentional balance between acknowledging tradition and embracing evolution set the tone for an address that would articulate Westlake's transformed vision while respecting its established identity. As I continued, outlining both the evening's program and the broader direction guiding the club's development, I noticed varied reactions across the audience, nodding agreement from those who welcomed the changes, contemplative consideration from those still assessing their implications, and occasional resistance from those most invested in previous arrangements. The Taylor family's reactions proved particularly revealing, their expressions and body language reflecting their individual processing of the club's transformation. Thomas maintained the calculated neutrality of someone reserving judgment while securing optimal positioning within new parameters. Aunt Diane's practiced social mask occasionally slipped to reveal flashes of genuine response, sometimes appreciative, sometimes resistant, always complex. Andrew alone displayed consistent positive engagement, his support reflecting the genuine recognition he had expressed during our coffee conversation. "Westlake's excellence has always depended on the contributions of many," I continued, acknowledging the expanded committee whose diverse perspectives had shaped the evening's vision. This year's gala celebrates that collaborative spirit while expanding its expression through broader participation and impact. As I introduced Sophia to detail the evening's charitable focus, I noted Marcus's studied attention, not the dismissive assessment he might have offered during our marriage, when my professional presentations were often framed as cute or impressive for a side project, but genuine consideration of substance and direction. Whether this evolved response represented authentic recalibration or strategic adaptation remained unclear, but the shift itself confirmed the broader pattern of adjustment to transformed reality. The formal program unfolded with precisely the balance I had envisioned, honoring valuable traditions while implementing meaningful updates, maintaining sophistication while eliminating unnecessary exclusivity, celebrating excellence while expanding its definition beyond conventional parameters. Community partners previously excluded from Westlake's orbit received recognition alongside established beneficiaries. Staff contributions were highlighted rather than rendered invisible, and success was measured through impact rather than adherence to tradition. Following the program, as attendees circulated through beautifully designed interactive spaces that encouraged connection across traditional boundaries, I observed the Taylor family's strategic navigation of this transformed social landscape. Their movement through the event revealed careful calculation, maintaining visibility and connection while adapting to new parameters, preserving family cohesion while exploring individual positioning within changed circumstances. Thomas approached as I was speaking with a group of community partners whose organizations would receive support through the gala's expanded charitable focus. His timing suggested deliberate selection of context, joining a conversation that positioned him adjacent to Westlake's new direction while maintaining connection to its traditional leadership. "The expanded beneficiary approach is generating significant enthusiasm," he observed, his tone suggesting professional assessment rather than personal endorsement. "Though I imagine some long-standing partner organizations may feel their historical connection has been diluted." The comment perfectly captured his evolved strategy, acknowledging positive aspects of change while subtly emphasizing potential costs, positioning himself as thoughtful evaluator rather than either resistant traditionalist or enthusiastic supporter. It continued the balanced approach he had adopted since our post-revelation dinner, a careful navigation between recognition of new reality and preservation of established perspective. The committee established clear criteria focusing on demonstrated impact rather than historical connection, I explained, introducing Thomas to the organization representatives present. Though many established partners continue receiving support based on the quality of their work rather than legacy position, the interaction highlighted the fundamental distinction between Westlake's previous approach and its current direction, moving from automatic continuation based on established relationship to demonstrated value renewed through actual impact. This shift precisely mirrored the broader transformation implemented throughout the club's operations, with status flowing from contribution rather than category, influence earned through merit rather than inherited through connection. As the evening progressed, similar interactions unfolded with various family members, each revealing their particular adaptation to Westlake's evolution. Aunt Diane circulated with practiced social skill, maintaining her traditional role as connection point between established groups while carefully incorporating previously excluded perspectives when strategically advantageous. Uncle George focused on financial networks, assessing how changed participation patterns might affect business relationships while positioning himself at the intersection of traditional and emerging power structures. Most significant was Andrew's approach, which differed fundamentally from other family members' strategic calculations, where they navigated the transformed landscape with careful consideration of advantage and positioning. He engaged with genuine interest in the event's purpose and impact, his interactions reflecting authentic connection rather than calculated appearance. "This is what Westlake should have been all along," he commented as we briefly connected between conversations. "Excellence without artificial limitation, tradition without reflexive exclusion. You've created something that maintains what was valuable while eliminating what wasn't." The observation captured precisely what I had intended through Westlake's transformation, preserving genuine quality while removing arbitrary barriers, honoring meaningful tradition while eliminating exclusionary practices, maintaining sophistication while expanding accessibility. That Andrew recognized and articulated this balance suggested potential for genuine understanding beyond strategic adaptation within at least some family contexts. Near the evening's midpoint, as musicians performed in the garden area, transformed from previous year's restricted relaxation zone to inclusive gathering space, I encountered Marcus in a moment of unplanned intersection. He stood slightly separated from surrounding conversations, observing the event with the calculating assessment he applied to all situations with potential professional or social significance. "You've substantially reimagined the club," he observed. As I approached, his tone carefully neutral, while maintaining elements that made it valuable. The balanced observation echoed his formal letter's measured acknowledgement, suggesting continued strategic positioning rather than genuine reassessment. Throughout our marriage, Marcus had consistently framed my perspectives and achievements within parameters that preserved his central position, acknowledging value within boundaries that maintained established hierarchy. The committee identified core elements worth preserving while implementing necessary updates, I replied with equal measure. Excellence and tradition remain central, just expressed through more inclusive and merit-based approaches. Our exchange continued with similar calibration: professional courtesy without personal connection, acknowledgement without endorsement, interaction without intimacy. This balanced distance reflected our evolved relationship, neither artificially friendly nor unnecessarily antagonistic, but contained within appropriate boundaries defined by current context rather than past connection. As Marcus prepared to rejoin Vanessa at their table, he offered a final observation that revealed more than perhaps intended. "You always had this vision," he noted, studying me with reassessment. "I just never fully understood its scale or potential. That's on me, not you." The acknowledgement, while limited compared to the comprehensive recognition it might have offered, nevertheless represented significant evolution from his previous positioning of my ambitions as problematic rather than valuable, disruptive rather. than visionary. Whether this shift reflected genuine insight or strategic adaptation remained unclear, but the changed perspective itself confirmed the broader pattern of recalibration catalyzed by Westlake's transformation. Throughout the remainder of the evening, similar moments of recognition emerged from various quarters, sometimes explicit in direct conversation, sometimes implicit in changed interaction patterns, sometimes apparent only through contrast with previous approaches. Collectively, these shifts created a portrait of community in transition, adapting to new parameters while preserving valuable elements of established identity and connection. As the formal program concluded and the evening transitioned to dancing and continued socialization, I took a moment to observe the transformed landscape from a quiet corner of the garden terrace. The scene before me captured perfectly the balance I had envisioned when planning Westlake's evolution: elegant, but not exclusionary, sophisticated but not segregated, maintaining excellence while expanding accessibility. Patricia joined me in this moment of reflection, her presence offering both strategic perspective and personal understanding. "You've created something remarkable here," she observed, surveying the diverse groups interacting with genuine engagement, rather than obligatory appearance. Not just a reformed club, but a demonstration of possibility. Her observation highlighted the deeper significance beyond Westlake's specific transformation. The changes implemented over recent months represented not just institutional reform, but practical demonstration that excellence and inclusion could reinforce rather than undermine each other, that merit-based standards could maintain quality, while expanding opportunity, that tradition could be honored without preserving exclusionary practices. "The Taylor family seems to be adapting with varied enthusiasm," Patricia noted, her gaze moving toward the strategically positioned family members visible throughout the event, some more authentically than others. Indeed, their navigation of the transformed landscape revealed a spectrum of responses, from Thomas's careful calculation to Andrew's genuine engagement, from Aunt Diane's strategic incorporation to Uncle George's pragmatic reassessment. Collectively, these varied adaptations created a portrait of family system in transition, individual members recalibrating at different rates and depths while maintaining collective identity amid changed circumstances. "They're processing at their own pace," I acknowledged, some recognizing value in the changes themselves, others simply adjusting to new realities they can't control. This distinction, between authentic appreciation and strategic adaptation, perfectly captured the variance in family responses to Westlake's transformation. Some members recognized genuine improvement in the club's evolved approach, while others simply accepted changed parameters as unavoidable reality, requiring tactical adjustment, rather than fundamental reassessment. As the evening proceeded toward its natural conclusion, I circulated among departing guests, noting with satisfaction the overwhelmingly positive response to the gala's reimagined format and focus. Community partners previously excluded from Westlake's orbit expressed appreciation for meaningful inclusion rather than tokenized presence. Long-standing members acknowledged the event's maintained excellence while incorporating valuable updates. Staff members reported improved working conditions that enhanced rather than undermined their professional contribution. The Taylor family's departure proved particularly revealing, their coordinated exit mirroring their strategic arrival. Thomas and Aunt Diane approached to offer carefully calibrated assessment, acknowledging quality while reserving judgment about direction, recognizing success while maintaining distance from specific reforms. Their measured validation reflected continued strategic positioning rather than authentic recalibration, calculated adaptation to change circumstances rather than genuine reassessment of fundamental values. Andrew's departure differed notably, his goodbye offering specific appreciation for elements that reflected Westlake's transformed vision. "The expanded beneficiary approach makes profound sense," he noted with genuine engagement. "Supporting organizations based on demonstrated impact rather than established connection creates more meaningful outcomes for everyone." This authentic, Recognition of value beyond strategic adaptation suggested potential for more fundamental recalibration within at least some family contexts. Evolution from inherited patterns to intentional principles, from assumed hierarchy to demonstrated value, from rigid tradition to purposeful practice. While not universal across the Taylor ecosystem, this potential for genuine transformation offered hopeful contrast to merely tactical adjustment. As the final guests departed and staff began the careful restoration process that would transform event spaces back to daily operations, I took a moment to absorb the evening's significance beyond its specific success. The gala had represented not just Westlake's public debut under new ownership, but concrete demonstration that institutions could evolve while preserving genuine value, that excellence could coincide with inclusion, that meaningful tradition could be honored without maintaining exclusionary practices. Patricia joined me for a final assessment before our own departure, her expression reflecting satisfaction with both practical outcomes and deeper significance. From basement room to transformational leadership, she observed with characteristic insight. That's the journey worth noting beyond specific metrics and outcomes. The observation captured the personal dimension underlying institutional change, my evolution from accommodating others' limitations to expressing authentic vision, from accepting assigned placement to creating contexts aligned with core values, from adapting to external expectations to establishing environments that reflected internal purpose. The basement room served its purpose, I acknowledged, recalling the dehumidifier's constant hum and the Christmas decorations stored alongside my temporary accommodations. It provided perfect clarity about patterns requiring transformation. Indeed, that assigned space had crystallized dynamics operating throughout my family experience. The assumption that my needs and contributions were less significant than others, the expectation that I would accommodate limitations without question, the positioning of my success as secondary to established hierarchy. Without that stark manifestation, the motivation for comprehensive transformation might have remained diffuse rather than focused, potential rather than actualized. As we departed Westlake's grounds, the transformed landscape illuminated by strategic lighting that enhanced natural beauty while ensuring security, I reflected on the journey from basement room to this moment of institutional leadership and personal alignment. The handwritten note saying Grace Basement Room had indeed catalyzed change, not through its intended diminishment, but through the clarity it provided about patterns requiring transformation. Driving through Oakridge's quiet streets toward my downtown apartment, I considered the varied responses evident throughout the evening, from strategic adaptation to genuine recognition, from tactical adjustment to authentic appreciation. These diverse reactions created a portrait of community in transition, individuals and groups recalibrating at different rates and depths while collectively navigating changed parameters and possibilities. Most significant was the demonstration principle underlying specific outcomes. Beyond Westlake's transformed operations or the Taylor family's strategic adjustments, the evening had provided concrete evidence that institutions could evolve while preserving genuine quality, that excellence could coincide with inclusion, that meaningful tradition could be honored without maintaining exclusionary practices. This practical demonstration held potential impact beyond specific contexts, offering tangible example that alternative approaches could succeed where tradition had claimed exclusive capability. As I arrived at my apartment building, the city, skyline illuminated against the night sky, created a fitting backdrop for this reflection on transformation's broader significance. The changes implemented at Westlake represented not just institutional reform or personal vindication, but practical demonstration that systems based on merit rather than arbitrary preference could maintain excellence while expanding opportunity. The basement room resident had indeed graduated, not just to different accommodations at future family gatherings, but to fundamental recalibration of how value and contribution were recognized and rewarded across multiple contexts. That evolution, from accepting assigned placement to creating environments aligned with core values, represented the most significant transformation catalyzed by that handwritten note saying Grace, basement room, just months earlier. Entering. My apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views quite different from the basement's limited perspective, I felt profound alignment between external circumstance and internal purpose. The journey from relegated family member to institutional transformer had unfolded not through becoming someone new, but through creating contexts where my authentic self could operate without artificial constraint or unnecessary limitation. Tomorrow would bring continued implementation of Westlake's evolving vision, ongoing navigation of recalibrated family dynamics, and further development of systems that valued contribution over category across multiple domains. But tonight had provided powerful confirmation that the path from basement room to transformational leadership represented not just personal journey, but demonstration possibility, concrete evidence that alternative approaches could succeed where tradition had claimed exclusive capability. As I prepared for rest after the evening's significant milestone, I placed the gala program on my bedside table, alongside the handwritten note I had preserved from that family reunion months earlier. The juxtaposition of Grace basement room with documentation of Westlake's transformed vision created perfect representation of the journey between these points. Not just changing personal circumstances, but demonstrating alternative possibilities. Not just achieving individual success, but creating contexts where authentic value could be recognized and rewarded regardless of arbitrary category or inherited status. The basement room had indeed served its purpose, providing perfect clarity about patterns requiring transformation. The resulting journey had created not just personal recalibration, but practical demonstration that excellence and inclusion could coincide, that merit rather than connection could determine appropriate influence, that contribution rather than category could establish legitimate value across multiple contexts and communities. 6 months after the summer gala, autumn had transformed Oakridge's landscape into a canvas of amber and crimson. Westlake Country Club's grounds reflected this seasonal shift with tasteful decorations that complemented nature's display rather than competing with it. I stood at my office window, reviewing quarterly performance metrics that confirmed what intuition had already suggested. The club's transformation had yielded measurable improvements across multiple indicators. Membership applications had increased by 63%, with significantly greater diversity in professional background and personal circumstance. Revenue from events had grown despite more accessible pricing structures, driven by increased participation and community engagement. Staff retention had improved dramatically, with exit interviews citing improved working conditions and recognition as primary factors. The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, Patricia reminded me, entering with the final presentation materials we had prepared. Quarterly review with all the evidence that inclusive excellence works in practice, not just theory. Indeed, today's board meeting would present comprehensive data validating Westlake's transformation, concrete metrics demonstrating that merit-based standards could maintain quality while expanding opportunity, that inclusion and excellence could reinforce rather than undermine each other, that tradition could evolve without losing genuine value. As we walked toward the boardroom, I noted how differently I moved through these spaces compared to my first visits as a member's spouse or my return as unexpected owner. The corridors that had once felt constricting with unwritten rules and invisible boundaries now represented possibility and purpose. Environments aligned with values rather than preserved limitations, contexts that facilitated authentic contribution rather than reinforced arbitrary hierarchy. The boardroom itself reflected this evolution, its traditional architecture preserved while eliminating elements that served exclusion rather than quality. The portraits of past presidents, all men from similar backgrounds, had been replaced, with tasteful landscapes by local artists. The heavy curtains that had limited natural light had been removed in favor of adjustable blinds that balanced illumination with privacy. The seating arrangement had shifted from rigid hierarchy to collaborative functionality, maintaining professionalism while eliminating unnecessary division. Board members were already gathering as we entered, their varied backgrounds reflecting Westlake's evolved leadership structure. Alongside representatives with long-standing club connection, sat new additions selected for relevant expertise and perspective rather than social position or family history. The resulting mix created productive balance between institutional knowledge and fresh insight, between valuable tradition and necessary innovation. Robert Harrington, who had maintained his board position through the ownership transition, approached as I settled my materials at the head of the table. "The membership numbers are impressive," he acknowledged, having received the preliminary report earlier that week. Particularly the retention rates among established members alongside new growth. This validation from someone who had initially viewed Westlake's transformation with significant skepticism carried special weight. Throughout the implementation process, Robert had evolved from resistant traditionalist to cautious participant to eventual advocate, his perspective shifting as concrete results demonstrated that changes were enhancing rather than diminishing the club's fundamental value. "The data speaks for itself," I agreed, as other board members took their seats. Though I believe the qualitative improvements in community engagement and staff experience may ultimately prove even more significant than the quantitative metrics. The meeting progressed with focused efficiency, each department reporting substantive improvements that collectively created a comprehensive portrait of institutional transformation, yielding measurable benefits. Financial performance had strengthened despite more accessible pricing structures. Event bookings had increased across both traditional gatherings and new formats. Membership demographics had diversified while maintaining high standards for professional accomplishment and community contribution. Most significant were the patterns visible across these various metrics. The consistent evidence that inclusion and excellence reinforced rather than undermined each other. That merit-based standards maintained quality while expanding opportunity. That removing arbitrary barriers enhanced rather than diminished institutional value. These patterns confirmed the fundamental premise underlying Westlake's transformation, providing concrete validation that alternative approaches could succeed where tradition had claimed exclusive capability. As the meeting concluded with unanimous approval of the quarterly report and strategic direction, I found myself reflecting on the journey from basement room resident to this moment of institutional leadership and demonstrable impact. The transformation catalyzed by that handwritten note saying, "Grace Basement Room," had unfolded not just through changing personal circumstances, but by creating contexts where authentic value could be recognized and rewarded, regardless of arbitrary category or inherited status. Later that afternoon, as autumn sunlight cast long shadows across Westlake's meticulously maintained grounds, I received an unexpected visit from Andrew. Unlike our previous meetings, which had typically occurred in neutral locations or professional contexts, he had come directly to my office at the club, a choice that suggested both comfort with this transformed environment and specific purpose behind his visit. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said as my assistant showed him in. "I was in the area for a deposition and thought I might catch you between meetings." "Perfect timing," I assured him, gesturing toward the seating area near the window where comfortable chairs had replaced the imposing furniture that had previously dominated this space. The board meeting just concluded with very positive quarterly results. Andrew settled into one of the chairs, his expression suggesting he had come with specific purpose rather than casual connection. "I'm not surprised. The changes you've implemented make fundamental sense once people move past reflexive resistance to anything different." This validation from a family member who had followed the prescribed professional path, yet recognized value in alternative approaches carried special significance. Throughout Westlake's transformation, Andrew had evolved from sympathetic observer to genuine supporter, his perspective reflecting authentic recognition rather than merely strategic adaptation. "I actually came to discuss the upcoming holiday gathering at Pinehaven," he continued. addressing the subject that had remained unmentioned in our recent interactions. Diane has begun planning the annual family Christmas, and there's been considerable discussion about your participation. The Taylor family's traditional Christmas gathering at Pinehaven Estate had historically served as annual reinforcement of established hierarchy and connection, with sleeping arrangements, table placements, and scheduled activities all reflecting and reinforcing relative status within the family system. My position in this carefully calibrated ecosystem had consistently placed me in peripheral roles in secondary spaces, culminating in that basement room assignment that had crystallized long-established patterns. "I've been wondering about that," I acknowledged. "Given everything that's changed since the last reunion, I wasn't certain whether my inclusion was assumed or questionable." Andrew smiled with genuine understanding. "That's exactly what prompted my visit. The family has been engaged in remarkably similar discussions, uncertain whether you would consider attending given what happened last time." The mutual uncertainty revealed how profoundly dynamics had shifted since that handwritten note saying, "Grace, basement room." Where previously my participation had been assumed while my proper accommodation had been dismissed, now my presence itself had become valuable, enough to prompt family consideration and Andrew's direct outreach. "Diane asked me to extend a specific invitation," he continued, his expression suggesting there was more to this message than simple holiday inclusion. "She wanted me to assure you that appropriate accommodations in the main house would be arranged, with the Blue Room specifically mentioned as available for your use." The Blue Room, Pinehaven's premier guest accommodation with its private bathroom and stunning view of the property's gardens, had traditionally been reserved for the family's most honored guests or highest status members. That Diane would specifically designate this space for me represented significant recalibration of perceived position and value within the family hierarchy. "That's quite an upgrade from the basement," I observed with a smile that acknowledged both the practical improvement and its symbolic significance. "Indeed," Andrew agreed with similar recognition, though I should note that this adjustment doesn't reflect unanimous family perspective. There's been considerable behind-the-scenes negotiation about appropriate acknowledgement of your changed circumstances without creating perception of fundamentally restructured family dynamics. This honest assessment highlighted the complex adaptation still unfolding within the Taylor family system, recognition of my transformed position balanced against preservation of established patterns, acknowledgement of changed external circumstances without fundamental reassessment of underlying values and assumptions. The Blue Room represented tactical adjustment rather than strategic realignment, practical accommodation rather than conceptual transformation. "And what's your perspective on these family negotiations?" I asked, curious about his individual position amid these collective calculations. Andrew considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I believe the basement room assignment was wrong regardless of external circumstances," he said finally. "Your professional achievements and Westlake acquisitions simply made that wrongness impossible to ignore or rationalize away. The family is adjusting to revealed reality rather than reconsidering fundamental patterns." This insight perfectly captured the nature of the Taylor family's evolution: strategic adaptation to changed circumstances rather than genuine reassessment of underlying values, practical adjustment rather than conceptual transformation, tactical response to revealed reality rather than fundamental recalibration of perspective and approach. "The Blue Room sounds lovely," I said after brief consideration. "Please thank Diane for the specific invitation and accommodation. I'll need to check my calendar regarding the specific dates, but I'm open to participating if schedules align." My response maintained the balanced approach I had cultivated throughout this period of transformation, neither automatically accommodating family expectations nor unnecessarily rejecting potential connection, neither resuming previous patterns, nor permanently severing established relationships. This measured engagement reflected evolved perspective rather than reactive positioning, intentional choice rather than habitual response. As Andrew prepared to leave, he offered a final observation that highlighted his unique perspective amid family recalibration. "Whatever room they put you in at Pinehaven, you've created something more significant here," he said, gesturing toward the grounds visible through my office window. "Not just a successful business venture or personal vindication, but demonstration that alternative approaches can succeed where tradition claimed exclusive capability." This recognition of Westlake's transformation as demonstration principle, rather than merely institutional reform or personal achievement, reflected profound understanding of the journey's broader significance. Beyond changed personal circumstances or improved club operations lay the concrete evidence that systems based on merit rather than arbitrary preference could maintain excellence while expanding opportunity. Practical validation that inclusion and quality could reinforce rather than undermine each other across multiple contexts. That demonstration matters more than any specific outcome, I agreed, walking with him toward the door. Creating contexts where authentic value is recognized and rewarded regardless of arbitrary category or inherited status. Our goodbye carried the warmth of genuine connection rather than strategic calculation, reflecting evolved relationship based on authentic recognition rather than predetermined positioning. As Andrew departed, I returned to my desk to complete preparations for the next morning's town hall with Westlake staff, a quarterly tradition established under new ownership to ensure transparent communication and meaningful feedback across all operational areas. The afternoon sunlight created patterns across my office floor, geometric designs formed by architectural elements working in harmony with natural illumination. These patterns seemed fitting representation of the structures that facilitated rather than constrained, the frameworks that enhanced rather than limited, the systems that recognized authentic value rather than reinforced arbitrary division. The Blue Room at Pinehaven awaited, its availability representing strategic adaptation to revealed reality rather than fundamental recalibration of family perspective. Yet that adaptation itself confirmed the demonstration principle at Westlake's core, concrete evidence that merit rather than connection could determine appropriate recognition, that contribution rather than category could establish legitimate value, that excellence and inclusion could coincide across multiple contexts and communities. The basement room resident had indeed graduated, not just to different accommodation at family gatherings, but to fundamental transformation of how value and contribution were recognized and rewarded. That evolution had unfolded not through becoming someone new, but through creating contexts where authentic self could operate without artificial constraint, environments aligned with core values rather than preserved limitations, systems that facilitated genuine contribution rather than reinforced arbitrary hierarchy. The journey from handwritten notes saying "Grace Basement Room" to this moment of institutional leadership and demonstrable impact had created not just changed personal circumstances, but practical validation that alternative approaches could succeed where tradition had claimed exclusive capability. This demonstration principle would continue expanding beyond specific contexts, offering concrete evidence that systems based on merit rather than arbitrary preference could maintain excellence, while creating opportunity previously withheld through limitation rather than legitimate requirement. The Blue Room awaited. But more significantly, the possibility it represented extended far beyond Pinehaven Estate or Westlake Country Club. The concrete demonstration that authentic value could be recognized and rewarded regardless of arbitrary category or inherited status, that excellence and inclusion could reinforce rather than undermine each other, that contribution rather than connection could determine appropriate influence across multiple contexts and communities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.